All right, I am here. Welcome everybody to Metam Monday. I think this is number 5. Yeah, it's number 5. So today we are going to be reviewing a video where someone asked a question about my views, and then the guest answered, and they gave some commentary on that. And so I had to listen to that, and I wanted to go over that and sort of clarify and discuss what my view on the matter is, and talk about what they said and the sorts of concerns that they raised about my view, so I could better sort of articulate what my position on this is. Okay, so first of all, hello to everybody in the comments. I do have another video that should be coming out on Thursday. It was recorded a while ago where I talk about consciousness and stuff like that. So more topics. I'm saying too many times. I gotta stop that. It's one of those things where you hear it and then you start doing it too many times, and then you have to consciously make an effort to not say it. See, I did it. See, that was not intentional. That was not intentional. Okay, so let me find the video. Okay, I got to find the video. And here it is. And it is timestamped in the description, so you could check out the video there. So a few things to say. It looks like a new channel. I only see 3 subscribers over there, and I'm one of them. So that means there was only 2 previous subscribers. So do go and give them a subscription. If someone only has, I said it again, if someone only has 3 subscriptions, it could be pretty hard to get a lot of views. I see that they had 52 views on there. I don't know if it's recounting me watching it a bunch of times. So go over there, do give them a subscription, check it out, and definitely, give the channel a chance. It looks like a new channel. But if you do comment over there, I know that there are interactions and conversations between moral realists and moral anti-realists. People on, I said it again, people on my channel may lean more towards anti-realism than realism on average. Like, it could be that a majority of you are anti-realists, or it's disproportionately high here. But I don't want this channel or the commentary or the community surrounding my discussion of this topic ever to become hostile or nasty or vicious towards people with contrary moral positions. So for instance, I take an illusionist view. It's not a very popular view among philosophers or people in general that take a position on these stances. So normally I'm not in a position where I hold this majority stance and I feel like I'm in a position to leverage that against people. But even if I were, I don't think that would be right. And I don't want people to be rude or nasty towards moral realists or proponents of the hard problem of consciousness or any of these sorts of views. I haven't seen a whole lot of that. But so that's one thing. The other thing is to do your best not to misconstrue or mischaracterize views. I misconstrue or mischaracterize people's views at times. And when I do that and I become aware of it, I try my best to acknowledge that and to rectify those mistakes and mischaracterizations. It's very easy due to motivated reasoning and other sorts of cognitive biases that we all are stuck with in virtue of having human brains. We are stuck thinking in ways that are not optimized for getting at the truth. We are, by default, we optimize for getting our way in persuading other people. At least that's my perspective on how human cognition evolved. So I think we're kind of stuck with that, and we got to work around it. And let's all do that together. So, go there, give them a subscription. I'm already stumbling over my words, and I just started. It's not a good sign for today's stream. So maybe I got to slow it down. So yeah. Anyway, so we will check that out. And I guess kind of waiting for people to show up. So I see that people are here. So let's start saying hi to people, and we'll get into the video. I don't have like a bunch of announcements or anything like that. Michael Ellerkamp says here for Lance Loons. Wasn't it Lance Loot? That was the idea. Yeah. Why don't I could officially start doing the Lance Loot next time, because we didn't already do it. Well, I could start it now. So I don't know how the Nathan Nichols work. I'm going to have to talk to Nathan over at Digital Gnosis about how many points people are going to get. And I'm going to have to create some kind of sheet. But yeah, maybe it'll be like, this is subject to change, because I think we're going to not do it today because people weren't expecting it. We got to use it to entice people. Although giving it today wouldn't not necessarily undermine that. And I got to figure out something to do with them. I could just keep them and not do anything with them. But maybe 500 for the first person, 300 for the second, and 100 for the third. I don't know. I'll talk to Nathan about what it's for. It's probably just silly and for fun, and it doesn't amount to anything. But you gotta take up the ideas that other people have. Although maybe Nathan has patented that and I can't use it. It's like a trademark or something. copyright, whatever it is. Maybe I'm not allowed to copy it. So, but if I can copy it, I will. All right. Sapir says, hi, Lance. Thank you for being here, and hello to you as well. So this person says, whoa, you have a long name. I'm not going to read all that out. If there's something specific I could call you, I'd be happy to do that. I noticed that in real life, we tend to use realism in life talk, but we are anti-realist if we abstract. So that's a position I don't actually take or would agree with. So, of course, welcome to take that stance. And, we could just disagree about it. But I don't think people talk like realists about morality in everyday life. I mean, there may be contexts where people speak in a way that looks kind of realist-like. There's also contexts where it looks like people speak in an anti-realist way, at least at times. And that's only from a degree of anecdotal familiarity with English speakers in the 21st century. We don't have a good sense, at least I don't, and I don't think most researchers do. There's over 7,000 languages in the world. How do people speak in those languages? And how do they speak across different contexts and in different cultural contexts and cultures I'm not familiar with, and in different social situations that I'm not typically a part of? I have no idea. And I know most people aren't going to know. And at most, if someone does know, they would know about a very narrow range. And even people that are, say, cultural anthropologists or something like that, that may or may not even be a focus of theirs to try to think about how people speak about morality. And they may not be well equipped to have a good sense of whether people speak like moral realists or anti-realists, or whether there's anything that would distinctively pick out speaking like a realist or an anti-realist. This is something I cover on this channel a lot, though. What's up, Nitty? Okay, and then they ask, do you think there's a gap between abstraction that is sometimes hard to get at and how you describe to people who get intuitively the realistic view? I'm not in a gap between abstraction. I mean, there are certainly differences between abstractions, like abstracting away from concrete cases, and that could lead to differences in how people think about things. But I don't know the specifics of your question, I guess. Money's not real, yet we think they're real. Well, there's a sense in which money is real. So I think that there are socially constructed facts. I think that the rules of chess are real in a fashion. So I think we could construct certain sorts of realities. I don't see a problem with that. Okay, so they also said they subscribe. Great. Okay. Cyprian. If that's right, let me know. Anthony says, based on reflecting on the way I've talked about morality in the past, I think some of the time people say objectively like we say literally, just as an emphasis for how strongly we feel. I think that that's plausibly true. And people in everyday life also use objectively to mean something like without prejudice or bias or something like that. They sometimes will use it to mean something like measurable or subject to an agreed upon standard, but that's consistent with anti-realism. So there's like an objective metric for how much mass a car has or something like that. And there's a certain sense in which there actually is some substantive independent fact about the mass of the car, but there's objective in the sense that it's subject to agreed upon units of measurement. So something like that that's a different sense of objective. Like, hey, you and I both agree to use this standard of evaluation. And because we agree on the standard of evaluation, there is a decisive and like matter that could be settled by employing the standard of evaluation. But that could be employed, like there's an objective way of measuring which movie is the best. We're going to talk about, like, let's say you used, this would be a bad metric, but how many viewers there were, like how many people saw the movie in theaters. So you could say, that's going to be part of my objective standard for how good a movie is. And so as long as you and another person agree on some standards or metrics and you employ those, and like you agree on what the metrics are, that could be regarded, and that's sometimes construed as a objective measure. But that's something like an intersubjective constructive agreement on standards of evaluation. That doesn't require that there be these stance-independent normative truths about how one ought to evaluate the matter independent of any intersubjective agreement on one standard over another. You could just agree to use some other standard to evaluate the very same thing. So that's the sort of thing that is yet another way in which people use the term objective. So terms like objective and subjective have all sorts of uses in ordinary language. They, I think, in practice, rarely map on to how philosophers use the terms. And even philosophers don't use the terms objective and subjective in a consistent, reliable way, either over time or between subfields or even within the same subfields. So not all philosophers would agree on how to construe the term objective, even within metaethics and even within contemporary analytic metaethics. So even if you get an extremely narrow field with like a few hundred people working in it, maybe a couple thousand people at most, and like really active people might be a few dozen. Even there, people don't agree on the terminology. So philosophers have been exceptionally bad at agreeing on any standardized terminology for discussing things, and I think it's to the detriment of philosophy that they fail to do so. Oh, right. Chiprian says, thank you, Lance. Yeah, no problem. And Edgar says, it would be cool if someone would arrange a debate discussion between Michael Huemer and Kane B. They could discuss absolute realm, fundamentalism, skepticism, and moral realism, anti-realism. That would be cool. Yeah, there's something interesting about debates because I really prefer discussions. In fact, I'm having a discussion tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that's about 5 hours, a little less than 5 hours from now, with Ben Watkins. I don't even know what channel it's going to be on. I'm showing up. We're going to have a discussion. So if maybe I'll post it in the community post if I have. I don't have the YouTube link for it. I'll try to track it down and post it in the community section later. I also said I wasn't going to do 50 minutes of announcements, and I'm pushing 12 minutes. So I gotta keep it short. I would love to see a discussion between Mike Huemer and Kane B. I really want to see more realists and anti-realists having discussions with one another, whether it's a debate or not. David Enoch would be another one. Eric Sampson, whose video I'm going to be reviewing today. Eric Sampson has put himself out there appearing in videos to discuss moral realism. And so while Eric Sampson seems critical of my views and I'm critical of Eric Sampson's views, I'm hoping that we could have more of these discussions and better understand one another's views, even if we end up still pretty much staying where we're at as far as our views. I think it'd be really cool. It's one of those issues when you get into moral issues where sometimes people could get a little upset about other people's views. I have a sort of view that many people would call nihilism, and they would see a view like mine potentially as a threat to purpose and meaning and value in life. Same thing with my views on free will. And that matters. And, maybe it's a good thing that this is a case where philosophers are disputing things that actually matter to us. So, we could be disputing things that don't matter and have no practical implications. This is a case where some people think that there are practical implications. I don't think that there's big practical implications, but that's my perspective. I could be wrong about that. Oh, that's a good question. Democracy the Dead. When am I going on their channel again? I think that had to be put on hold when I'm going to continue discussing that. Yeah, so I was on Democracy the Dead's channel to discuss my dissertation work, which is my dissertation is called Schrodinger's Categories. And that's where I make a sort of empirical and theoretical case for what I call folk metaethical indeterminacy. I don't like that term folk, but that's what I've been calling it, which is the view that non-philosophers are neither moral realists nor anti-realists, either explicitly or implicitly. I use specific terminology in that work. I say that they have no determinate metaethical stances or commitments. Stance would be something like a belief, like they don't believe realism is true, believe anti-realism is true. And a commitment would be something, it could be cashed out in a number of ways, but you could implicitly hold a view, even if you didn't explicitly articulate it. And depending on if it's the sort of thing where if someone said, hey, do you believe morality is objective? And you said, what do you mean by objective? Oh, well, it's true, like regardless of what anyone says or thinks about it. It's not made true by our preferences. And then someone said, oh yeah, I believe that. I would say that that's a stance, not just a commitment. But if the way a person speaks happens to accord best with realism, or if you would have to really extract it out of a person where it's not at all obvious even to them on sort of even a surface level reflection, that would be an indication of some sort of implicit commitment to realism. And I argue that there's empirical evidence out there that some of the early evidence suggests people are pluralists. They take a realist sense of some things, anti-realist on others. Newer studies are leaning more towards there being a higher proportion of anti-realism. And I critique all of that research. I say, hey, we need to be very skeptical of all these measures. And we're really not in a position to know whether people are realists or anti-realists. But I argue that there's additional and further considerations, both based on that evidence and on my own evidence, that people may not have any position. And the reason why these studies they're yielding these like really mixed and unusual results may be that people are not interpreting questions the way the researchers intend. So I'll be returning to their channel at some point. I don't know when. It may be in a few months, but it's definitely something I want to do and I think they want to do to continue exploring that topic. So thanks for that question. And after this one, I will start on the video, and then I can pause it to address questions, but I do want to get rolling on the video. Do you have an article or opinion on the Frege-Geach problem? I don't have an article on the Frege-Geach problem, but it is something that comes up a lot because it's very popular. as an issue. So the Frege-Geach problem is this issue that is taken to undermine non-cognitivist accounts in metaethics. So in metaethics, non-cognitivist accounts hold that there are no objective or stance-independent moral truths, and this largely is centered on a semantic analysis of the meaning of moral claims. So we take some claim like stealing is wrong. It looks like a declarative sentence. It looks like it's expressing a propositional claim. It's saying something that's true about what the world is like, whether it's a statement about a person's desires or goals. Even a relativist is a cognitivist. They think moral claims are capable of being true or false. That's what cognitivism is. The non-cognitivist says, look, take that sentence, stealing's wrong. It might look declarative, it might look like a propositional claim, but it's actually not a proposition. It's actually expressing some non-propositional content. It may be expressing an emotion. So like, if I take a bite of cake and I go, this cake is delicious, I wouldn't have to construe what I am trying to do there as I am providing you with information, a propositional claim about what is true, that this cake has the property of deliciousness. You could mean that, but that could just be an exclamation. Like cake, yum. And if someone said, hey, why didn't you just say yum? You could say, I could have said that. I could have said, holy crap. And someone goes, why? Because the cake is delicious. Sometimes a seemingly proposition, like structurally, the grammar of the utterance, you have to be careful about the terms, because if you say sentence or claim, those terms sometimes imply propositionality, like you're trying to say something true or false. But the utterance, the sounds you're making, this cake is delicious, that's just an expression. This cake, yum. This cake right here, yum. So that's not true or false. Yeah, any more than ow, it can be true or false. So that's emotivism or the boo-hurrah theory, where, hey, certain moral claims, their sort of primary function is expressive. It's to express emotions. And this is why these days it's not called non-cognitivism so much. I'm saying this is why, but I don't actually know the history. These days, the position most people would espouse in this domain would be called expressivism rather than non-cognitivism. I don't know what prompted that change. Ask a historian. It's something I would love to look into at some point, but there's specialists that are going to know better than me. So that's one view. There's other sorts of views. Very simplistic alternative would be some type of prescriptive view, where moral claims express imperatives rather than emotions. So stealing is wrong would mean something like don't steal. Now, is don't steal true or false? No, it can't be true or false. Same like shut the door, pass the salt. So imperatives, just like yum, can't be true or false. So the Frege-Geach problem takes a look at these, like the claim, hey, when you say stealing is wrong, you're saying like stealing, boo, or don't steal. And that seems really weird if you, for instance, embed it in an argument. And there's other sorts of ways of construing this, but you could try to put it in a syllogism and it ends up looking weird. Whereas if you treated stealing is wrong as a propositional claim, something capable of being true or false, it seems like a natural fit for a syllogism, for instance. So you might have something like shoplifting is a type of stealing. All types of stealing are wrong, so shoplifting is wrong. Something like that. And because you're embedding the statement about stealing being wrong in a syllogism where you have these premises, and the premises are typically taken to be propositions capable of being evaluated as true or false, it looks like an utterance like stealing is wrong seems to function like a proposition because it can be embedded in an argument. And there's other sorts of ways, like you could reason about whether you really should, steal or not. And it seems a little weird to reason about whether like cake, yum. That seems a little weird. So the way that it looks like when you look at the structure of what you could do with moral claims, it looks like you can use them in broader contexts that sure makes them look propositional. So that's taken to be an argument against non-cognitivism or expressivism. Now, I'm not a non-cognitivist or an expressivist, but I also don't think the Frege-Geach problem is a really big problem. And part of the reason for that is because I don't take utterances, I don't take the question to be an analytic question, and I don't take it to be the sort of question that could be addressed from the armchair. If we're asking the question, what do moral claims mean? Like, are they only expressing non-propositional content, or do they also express propositional content? I think the question itself is fundamentally misguided. I don't think sentences express anything. I don't think sentences themselves have any meaning. That sounds weird. The sentence has no meaning. It doesn't express anything. No, the sentence doesn't express anything. People express things with sentences. And that might seem like a pedantic point to make, but my slogan on this is words don't mean things, people mean things. It's not pedantic. It's a deeply important distinction. I don't think anything like stealing is wrong has any inherent meaning. I think stealing is a sound or a set of symbols that a person could employ in some context for them to express something, for them to attempt to communicate something. And so I don't think there are any rigid fixed meanings to words or phrases or sentences at all. Like in principle, there aren't any. I don't even think it makes sense to talk about sentences meaning things. I think of sentences as tools or a type of behavior that people use for them to try to express something like their goals or their beliefs or their desires or something like that. And so if you ask the question, what does stealing is wrong mean? It's not like I would say, well, you have to ask the specific person using it in a specific context. You can ask questions in the statistical aggregate. Like you could say, for instance, you could say how many calories are in a banana. Now, does that mean it would be really weird if I said that question is absurd? There's no way to evaluate how many calories are in a banana because there are only concrete and individual bananas. So you could evaluate the amount of calories in this banana, and the banana right next to it could be from the same bunch of bananas, so they're all the same size, the same like type of banana or whatever. They're going to be pretty similar. It's not like, there's little extra tiny bananas and the big bananas that very different calories. Even if bananas are next to each other, it's 3 or 4 calorie difference. So no banana is going to have exactly the same amount of calories as any other banana. So there's no way to answer the question, how many calories are in a banana? That's silly. You could say, okay, well, we're going to take like the standard Chiquita banana. We're going to get 1,000 of them. We're going to randomly sample them, and we're going to test how many calories in them. And then we're going to get the average or something like that, or the median, whatever metric we want to use. And we're going to say, that's typically how many calories are in this type of banana. And so you're making it's like inferential statistics, or just, you're getting descriptive data. Where you're like extrapolating to the population of whatever population of bananas you want. And then you're talking about like the abstract banana. And then you could say, how many calories does that banana have? You could do the same. I said I wasn't going to go 15 minutes. Too bad. Now we're talking about Frege-Geach. So I guess someone can timestamp when I get to reviewing the video. So, but hey, if people ask questions, I want to answer them. Anyway, so that works for bananas, right? So you could get the statistical accurate. You could do the same thing for words. You could say when someone says the cat is on the mat, in most contexts, what would they typically be trying to express? And it's probably exactly what you would think it is. That there's an animal like this, like a feline, like a cat, like a house cat, and it is laying on a mat, like the things you lay on the floor. They're flat. They could mean something else, but that is typically what they're going to mean. So there's going to be these sort of statistical or average facts about how people use certain words, terms, or phrases in some given context. And you could extrapolate away from any given context and talk about 93.6% of the time within contemporary American English in the United States, in the continental United States, when a person says a cat on the mat, this is the sort of thing they're trying to express. And they're not going to be perfectly overlapping because your concept of cat, my concept of cat might not be identical. Maybe I specifically have in mind house cats and you don't. You include a broader number of cats. Maybe to throw bobcats in there. I don't know. So you have this, when you look at this, there's this statistical averaging away. So when I look at something like when someone, like what does stealing is wrong mean? I want clarification. Are you asking an empirical question about what people typically intend to express when they say stealing is wrong? Because that's how I interpret that. And if that's what you're asking, then it's an empirical question, how people use that phrase in practice. And so does that mean that that people could not, in a meaningful and totally comprehensible way within the English language, say stealing is wrong in a way that's intended to be propositional and embedded in a syllogism and treated as a proposition in a philosophical discussion? They obviously can do that. So the phrase stealing is wrong clearly can appear to be used without it appearing wrong or like non-standard English in a proposition. So does that mean stealing is wrong is a proposition? Well, the phrase can't be a proposition. The only meaningful question here is, can it be used as a proposition? And the answer to that is a trivial yes. You could ask other questions like, is it weird? Because like anything could be used as a proposition. I could say potato, potato, potato is a proposition if I really want to. Because you could say, well, what do you mean by potato, potato, potato? And I say, well, I mean that 2 + 2 = 4. So anything could be a proposition. The question would be like, there'd be questions like, does it seem weird when philosophers use it that way? It doesn't. It doesn't seem weird. And that might give us some insight into the plausibility that when in ordinary and everyday interactions, people use the phrase stealing is wrong, they too are also expressing propositions. Maybe, but why would you rely on armchair evidence? Like, hey, I'm sitting here in my chair. I'm literally in a chair thinking about the phrase stealing is wrong and how English speakers use it. Seems like you could use it in a syllogism, so it does seem propositional. Whereas shut the door, that doesn't seem like a proposition. But it's still an empirical question, and you would still want to go out and find out. So what if we found out this? What if we did a bunch of empirical research? Now, this isn't realistic, but let's say we went out and we did an empirical research where we like philosophers acted like anthropologists or psychologists doing like field research where they recorded people having conversations in like a public park or somewhere where you could do this at a festival, at a concert, somewhere where there's a lot of people gathered, and you record it all and you look for the moral claims and you find all the instances of stealing is wrong. And you look at how does that person seem to be using it in this context. Maybe you interview people, you do surveys. Now, let's say it turns out that outside of philosophical conversations, 99% of the time when a person says stealing is wrong, they're issuing an imperative or they're expressing an emotion. So you then ask those people, you could show those people, hey, it looks like, well, philosophers say you can embed stealing is wrong in a syllogism and it looks propositional. Does that seem wrong to you? And they're like, no, it seems fine. Okay, so now what do we conclude? So there's nothing weird about including them in a proposition if you want to, but in practice, they're almost always used to express emotions or issue imperatives. Is non-cognitivism true? How are you operationalizing the claim? Because if you're operationalizing it as something like, if a substantial majority of the time, or the primary function of the discourse in practice is to express imperatives or issue emotions or express other non-propositional content, non-cognitivism would be true. And all the armchair talk about how you could express it in, you could embed it in a syllogism or something, or it seems to function as a proposition in philosophical contexts, would be relevant. You just, okay, yeah, you could do that. It just doesn't mean that that's the inherent meaning of the stealing is wrong. So I don't think Frege-Geach poses any problem in non-cognitivism, unless the non-cognitivists takes themselves to be sharing the same methods and they think this is an analytic issue. And then I think that the methods are the problem and not any particular position. So hopefully that'll give some insight into my perspective on the matter. Okay. Anthony says, all of our value expressions run on the same issue. People talk about food preferences in a way that would also be a problem for Frege-Geach. Yeah, so like, but also people do sometimes use seemingly propositional language to express imperatives. People will say like, you will not do that again. And there's something imperatival about that. So language is more flexible. It's rigid. People use seemingly propositional language to express non-propositional stuff. They use non-propositional stuff probably in some cases to express propositional stuff. Philosophers have a weird, overly structured and rigid view about how language works, and they're wrong about how language works. So when analytic philosophers start actually understanding how language works a little better, like I don't really understand how it works, but I know how it doesn't work, and it doesn't work like that. So Spear says, I still don't understand. Could you explain all of that again, Lance? Sarcasm. Okay. Edgar says, thanks for the detailed answer. You are very welcome. Hopefully this will be my canonical response. I could clip it and put it somewhere, so I could just link it to people. All right, let's get into the video. Got to share it over here. Boop, 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 boop. Why is it? It's looking a little weird. 1 second. Okay, that seems fine. Right. All right, how's that looking? And we just got to see it should be 22:06. I have it like 1 second behind. All right. Here is where it starts. So before this, Eric does a good job laying out the different sort of meta-ethical positions on the table, and we're not going to review that. So this time I did a little pre-screening to see that we did not need to listen to the first 22 minutes. So we're going to get into this, and let me know if the volume is like too high or too low or whatever, and I can make some adjustments. One moment. We'll take a little break before we get started. All right.
Like pushback recently against people.
That seems low for me. I can barely hear it, so I'm going to turn that up a little.
People like Lance Bush, for example, who just can't make sense of.
Still too low for me. I'm going to have to adjust my own volume. How is that sounding for other people? I'll give a little buffer to lead up to it so I can make sound adjustments.
Be wrong. What I'm getting a grip on is the fact, the reality, a fact about moral reality, that it's wrong to do this kind of thing. And if that's right, if it's wrong to burn people alive for the reading light it provides, and it doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes, then that means that that's a stance-independent moral truth, which is what realists are committed to. So that's how you get to the realism. So yeah, it's wrong to burn people alive for the reading light it provides, and it doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes. So there are some moral truths. They don't depend on our attitudes, and we can come to know them. That's basically what realism is committed to. So that's why I'm a realist.
So there has been some kind of like pushback recently against people like Lance Bush, for example, who just can't make sense of categorical normativity. What would you say for people that are like that?
Pretty good characterization. Can't make sense of categorical normativity. A few things to note about this. There is always this issue when I say that I can't make sense of categorical normativity, or I prefer the phrasing irreducible normativity. I also talk about external reasons or decisive reasons. Different philosophers use different terminology. When I say I can't make sense of it, I'm not making a claim. They didn't say this, but I'm not making a claim about, like, it could turn out to be true that it's just a personal issue for me and for some other people that likewise make similar claims. But by sort of formal position, it's not a claim like, hey, I can't make sense of this, period. Nor is it an inference from the fact that I can't make sense of it to the fact that it doesn't make sense. It's and this is something I'll develop as we hear more of this. It's more like this. Philosophers coming at this issue, and just to give you a little context, basically my view on the matter is I have what I call the anti-realist trilemma. I think that every version of moral realism is trivial, false, or unintelligible. Now, the trivial versions are typically your naturalist realisms that treat moral claims as, in many cases, as a type of descriptive claims, so moral facts or facts about what increases or decreases well-being. These seem to be trivial because they lack practical authority, and they often end up looking to me like they cash out moral facts in terms of verbal descriptions of facts that I already think are true anyway. And they're just like, yeah, see those facts you already think that are there? Those are the moral facts. Okay, that has no practical relevance to me for how I make decisions. I make decisions based on my goals and values. That's practically irrelevant to me. It's just sticking a label on the facts that are already there. There might be naturalist accounts that try to be a little bit more robust than that, and then they're just going to run up against this other issue, which is unintelligibility. And unintelligibility, on my view, only applies to specific uses of terms and concepts by academic philosophers and maybe some people that are influenced by them. The main one being irreducible normativity. This is the idea that notions like should, shouldn't, ought not, good, bad, that this terminology picks out concepts that can't be redescribed or reduced to descriptive facts or descriptive accounts or descriptions that are meaningful in a way that's fully describable without appeal to the normative claims themselves, the normative terms or concepts themselves. In other words, there are certain sorts of concepts to which these terms refer, and the concepts themselves, you could say, are irreducibly normative. They can't be understood in purely descriptive terms because they're not purely descriptive concepts. They have normative content, and that normative content just can't be and isn't descriptive. It just is normative. I don't think there are concepts like that. I'm not saying I don't get it, so I think there aren't such things. I'm saying I actually think I do get it. Like, I think I have the right perspective on the matter, and that in virtue of my understanding of the relevant terms and concepts, that's why I think there aren't concepts like this. A bit like maybe someone that's into geometry would tell me that this is not a good comparison. But imagine someone said, "Hey, there's a geometric shape between a triangle and a square or rectangle, like a three-sided object and a four-sided object, that actually has a number of sides in between that amount." What? It doesn't make sense. There are three-sided objects, four-sided objects, five-sided objects. There isn't something between the three and the four-sided objects. That's just conceptually nonsensical. If you understand what triangles and squares and rectangles are, and trapezoids and whatever parallelograms, then you know that there isn't a shape like that. And it would be something a bit like that, where in virtue of having what I take to be an appropriate understanding, a correct understanding of the relevant concepts, I understand that these concepts are not available to people. Something like that. Now, I don't tend to frame things in those terms because I reject the entire a prioristic armchair analytic framework in which philosophers approach this question in the first place. I don't agree with their methods, but if I employed the method, like if I say, okay, I'm going to put on my analytic philosopher hat and employ methods just like those that these philosophers do, I would say, well, okay, well, when we talk about reasons, just as a matter of their conceptual content, are facts about, like normative reasons, are relational facts about the association or the relation between desires and means of acting in accord with those desires. That's just constitutively what a reason is. Reasons just are inherently stance dependent. And so anti-realism is just pretty much wins on analytic grounds because, yeah, I think about what reasons are. Reasons are going to involve my desires or your desires or someone's desires or stances somewhere. And so, yeah, anti-realism is just the way to go on the matter as a matter of analyticity. I could make that move if I wanted to employ those methods, but I think the methods are bad. So I'm arguing on the matter with my hands kind of tied behind my back because I can't just say, well, I could, but I just wouldn't believe it. Yeah, this is just an analytic matter in virtue of my understanding of the concepts. Normative reasons are stance dependent. Boom, done. Now, what would the response to that would be? It would be something like, no, they're not. No, they're not. We've reasoned about it, and they could be stance dependent or they could be stance independent. And you work through the thought experiments and your understanding of the terms and concepts, and we understand them to, in some cases, be stance independent. Maybe there are some stance dependent norms, but there are other norms that are stance independent. Maybe moral norms are one category of norms that are stance independent, and we have those concepts, and we understand this to be the proper way of construing these concepts. Okay, well, I don't agree. So how would we resolve this as a matter of analyticity or just thinking it through? Why should I grant that their way of thinking about the concepts is correct or better than my way of thinking about these concepts? Now, one thing that philosophers who endorse these positions could say is, well, there's more of us than you. It's not a popularity contest. So that could be taken. So if it's a direct appeal to popularity, that's not going to work. I'm not saying Eric Sampson or anybody else has done this, but direct, like, polls are not going to settle the matter. Like you just survey the experts and whoever has more experts, they win. I mean, one, that would make the truth it would just be an epistemic access issue, but it's not determined by who happens to be the majority because you're going to get weird, like obvious counterexamples to that. Like for instance, one example I like to give is what if a philosopher, like what if I flew to Mars and I made millions of copies of myself on Mars. And so now 99% of philosophers agree with me. Like, do I just win by default because there's millions of copies of me? No, that's not a very plausible way of thinking about it. Or what if I got really, really popular and I had a big following of people that all agreed with me and they all went and got PhDs in philosophy? Would I win then? No, I wouldn't. The truth of these conceptual truths are not going to be determined by who happens to have a majority on their side. Or, what if there's a big disaster and there's a plague or something and it kills a lot of people and it happens to shift the proportion of realists and anti-realists in a way that favors people with my perspective? Do I win then? Again, no, because the content of the concepts or which position is true on conceptual grounds or analytic grounds is not going to be determined by mere popularity. So popularity is at best some sort of indirect proxy for expertise or the correct deployment or application or competence with employing these concepts. Okay. If, again, I'm in the minority on the issue, do we settle out other issues in philosophy when there's a dispute about analytic considerations by sheer majority? No, we work it out, we argue. And so in some cases, it looks like analytic philosophers in some issue or with respect to some issues just kind of bulldoze the opposition by saying there's more of us. And they shouldn't do that. Again, not saying that's happening here, but when that does happen, that shouldn't happen. This is a matter to be discussed. And if you want to make the analytic appeals for positions, I could do the same if I wanted to. And I'm not just going to accept that because more philosophers think that this is right, that I need to defer this particular concept or this particular position. I need to defer to them. Why? If they think they're the experts, I want evidence or reasons to think that they're experts and that I ought to defer to them. And this is one of those cases. So that would be one issue. Now, it would be one thing if I were a total outsider that didn't read the literature and didn't know anything about this, and I was sort of just shooting from the hip in terms of what I'm saying and thinking about this, but that's not what's happened. I am part of this discourse. I'm part of this field. I work in this area. So like and there are other people that have similar perspectives to me, which I will get to. Okay.
Yeah. So I do hear online. You don't hear it much among philosophers. Yeah, I guess.
So Eric's saying he hears this more online. You don't hear it much among philosophers. This is true. You do not hear this that much among academic philosophers. That doesn't mean you don't hear it at all. And at some point, I'll have to stop to show you something because I've showed this before, but I'm going to show it again. Where like a big name professional philosopher has expressed pretty much the same view as me, even using some of the same terminology. So we'll get to that. But yeah, typically this sort of view is more prominent online. I have increasingly found people all over the internet, people that I don't even know if they've ever heard of what I have to say about this, who hold similar views, that they don't just say moral realism seems false. They'll say stuff like it seems like nonsense or unintelligible or conceptually confused or meaningless or and so on and so forth. Similar sorts of ways of saying it doesn't make sense or it couldn't be true or it's not always exactly the same idea, but many people go beyond just saying it looks totally coherent but false, but they actually will say stuff like it doesn't look like it makes a whole lot of sense. Again, not a very prominent view, at least today, among academic philosophers. That's fine. I do worry that there's some insinuation here that makes it a less defensible or plausible or acceptable for someone to hold. Like, hey, this isn't a popular view, so you should look at it more skeptically. There's a certain sense in which I think that's true. If the view isn't well represented in the literature, maybe you could regard it as there's a reason for that. Maybe it's not a very plausible position. But sometimes a view isn't popular in a literature because there's a problem with the methods or assumptions or dogmas that are prominent in that literature. And this is a case where I think that is what's going on.
So I have many reactions. One reaction is like, well, sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I understand what I mean. Lots of other people.
So this I take to be not a very helpful response. So I'm sorry. I don't know what to, let's take that back to see exactly what he says.
So I have many reactions. One reaction is like, well, sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I understand what I mean. Lots of other people seem to know what I mean.
So that's part of what I'm questioning. That's why it's important not to frame this as I don't know what they mean. I'm not saying I don't know what you mean. I'm saying nobody knows what you mean because the position isn't meaningful. And take something like Pete Mandick's work on qualia quietism. Pete Mandick is not saying I, Pete Mandick, do not know what the term qualia means. Pete Mandick is making a claim about the meaningfulness of the term in its uses among like other professional philosophers, that the term itself, you can't say much about it because it's not meaningful. There's all these different uses of this terminology. They don't amount to any substantive claims. You get this viciously circular set of mutually interdefining definitions that never bottom out in anything substantive. I've taken, and again, that's a published paper in academic philosophy that's applied to another concept where many philosophers would scoff at the illusionist or the qualia quietus, like myself, and say that these positions are silly and that it's obvious that we have phenomenal consciousness. It's the most obvious thing. And so the point here is just that. Professional philosophers have presented these quietistic views about the arguing for the meaninglessness of other prominent terms in other areas in philosophy of consciousness. I'm doing that here. This is a position on the table. And when the position is articulated, again, it's really, really critical to understand it's not the claim, I don't get it. It's the claim there isn't anything to get. And so we take a look again at what he says.
Oh, I do hear, this. I've heard this online. You don't hear it much among philosophers. Yeah, I guess. So I have many reactions. One reaction is like, well, sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I understand what I mean. Lots of.
So that's what I'm questioning. I don't think Eric understands what external reasons or categorical or irreducible normativity are. The whole point of my position is that it's not meaningful. There isn't something to understand. And so I understand his position is that he doesn't know what to tell me because he understands what it means, but I don't think that he does. So that's the matter of contention. The matter of contention isn't I don't get it, but maybe you do. It's I don't think there's something to get. Okay.
Other people seem to know what I mean. Error theorists know what I mean. Constructivists seem to know what I mean. And lots of people who deny that there are stance-independent moral truths seem to know exactly what's being claimed. They just don't think that there are such things, but they don't deny that they can't understand what that is. So I guess if you know what a
And this is certainly true. So probably a majority of anti-realists, if asked, would say, yeah, I know what they're talking about. I just don't think that there is something like that. So this would include constructivists, error theorists, expressivists, generally speaking, analytic philosophers working on this topic. I haven't seen a survey on this, but if they didn't think the concepts are meaningful, it would be a little weird to argue that they're false, because they would just say it's not false, it's not meaningful. But they don't tend to argue that. And so I think it's reasonable to suppose that it's probably the case that a majority of them would say that they think that these concepts are meaningful, but not true.
Reason is, if you know what it is for something to...
Oh, sorry.
There are such things, but they don't deny that they can.
Now here's the point I want to make. As we listen to this video, ask yourself at any point, does Eric ever explain what irreducible normativity or categorical normativity or external reasons or decisive reasons, this cluster of concepts, does he ever explain what they mean? And spoiler alert, no, he never explains what they mean. And that's part of the problem with these concepts. They are not explicable. You can't explain what they mean. And so this is something I want to flag as a serious point of departure between myself and Eric. And if it is the vast majority of analytic philosophers working in metaethics, I'm perfectly fine disagreeing with the vast majority of them. They appear to claim to all share an understanding of concepts. These concepts are picked out by certain terms. They can't explain what they mean. They simply can't explain what they mean. They all are super confident they know what they mean. They can't explain it. Now, could there be terms that pick out concepts? The concepts are meaningful, but you can't explain them. They're ineffable. They're incommunicable. Maybe. But I think that should be at least a red flag. I think it should at least, we should at least put a pin on that and go, something's a little funny here. People are using terms and concepts, these technical terms and concepts, that it's not, they can't tell us what they mean. There's something ineffable about them. Something's funny about that. Now, my personal view is that is a pretty surefire indication that it's probably not meaningful. And I understand that people may disagree with that, but and that's a case that I have to make, is, I would need to provide an account of meaning. Hey, this is what I mean by meaningful. This is why these things don't meet these standards for meaningfulness. But note that the people that employ these terms don't even seem to recognize that they're, or share, recognize. They don't seem to share with me a concern that there's a problem here if you're using terms and you can't explain what they mean. So we'll get some examples and stuff like that, but we're not going to get anything, as far as I'm concerned, that amounts to a substantive explanation of the meaningfulness of these concepts. Speaking of which, note someone from the comments here. If you really think you understand what you mean, then explain it. So here, what you would get is not an explanation, but the claim that, for instance, you might be told the concept is unanalyzable. It just has the property, it has properties in virtue of which it can't be explained. Okay, I mean, shouldn't there be more questions here? Why isn't anyone, look, even if I'm wrong, shouldn't we at least be curious about this? Why? Why are these concepts inexplicable and unanalyzable, but other concepts aren't? And how do you know when a concept is incommunicable or unanalyzable, rather than that you just haven't yet succeeded at analyzing it or how do you tell? And when a term is unanalyzable such that its meaning can't be communicated, note that it shares something in common with literal nonsense, meaningless terms, like if I said blibbity blibbity, or all 'twas brillig and the slithy toves. It's nonsense phrases. Note something about the meaning of those. You can't communicate them either. So ineffability is shared in common between these allegedly meaningful but ineffable and unanalyzable concepts and literal nonsense. How do you distinguish them? It's not like proponents of these concepts lay out at the beginning of a book on non-naturalist realism. Here's how you distinguish my concepts from nonsense. Here's how you tell them apart. No, this is just seen as a non-issue, and it's glossed over, and it isn't addressed. And what I see in all of these cases is everyone wants to pivot and put all the burden on me to show that it's not meaningful, when they haven't shown that it is meaningful. They just all insist it's meaningful and they know what it means. And if you don't get it, too bad, so sad for you. What on earth? Just imagine you're on the outside of a group and a bunch of people in a group are all using a word. They're saying, oh, that's very blurberific. And you say, okay, well, what do you mean by blurberific? And they're like, well, you either know or you don't know. And, I know what it means. Don't you know what it means? And they all just insist they know what it means. What would you think? I would think something funny was going on. Now, I might think maybe I just don't get it yet. But if after discussion, you say to one person, can you explain what it? Oh, no, it's beyond explanation. Or they give examples, and the examples all just refer back or appeal to the concept, or they say stuff like, well, you probably already have the concept. Everybody has a concept of blurforific. Maybe you have the concept and you just don't notice that you have the concept. You get all these sorts of remarks like this, that it's not like if someone said, hey, my friend has a pet sugar glider, and you go, what's that? And then they show you a picture, they show you the Wikipedia page, maybe the friend shows up with the sugar glider, and you get to learn about what it is and there's facts to learn. They could describe it, you could see it, you could interact with it, you could make predictions based on what it would be like or wouldn't be like if someone had a sugar glider. You can't do any of that for these concepts. At least that's my claim, that there's no predictions to be made. There's no explanation to be made. There's no way to ostensibly point to these facts. There's no way to explain what they mean verbally without appeal to the concepts themselves. So there's no sort of non-circular way to explain what they mean. There's just no way to access these. People just purport having access to them somehow without explanation. And also with supreme confidence and no sense that there's anything challenging or questionable about this. Look, again, I could be wrong, but there's something strange about this. There's something real strange about this. Okay.
So I guess if you know what a reason is, if you know what a reason is,
okay. So when you use the term reason, there's a lot of things you could mean by a reason. There's explanatory, what's the reason for why it rains? And then you could give an explanation for why it rains. Of course, I understand that, so there's causal explanations, and you could characterize reasons in those terms. So the word reason has all sorts of uses, both non-technical uses in everyday life. So someone says, hey, I decided, so let's say a friend of yours borrows a car, and they show up and they're all wet and they're covered in seaweed. And you go, what happened? And they're like, hey, I decided to drive your car into the ocean. So you might respond, why? For what reason would you do that? They're looking for an explanation. So perfectly sensible use of the term reason. The word reason has all sorts of uses in everyday situations. What I would say about those uses of the term reason is, one, I use those terms and senses of reason. I talk about reasons all the time. Two, it would be an empirical question how people are using the terms in this context. We would need to go do empirical research. We're not going to solve it from the armchair. And three, they're going to turn out to be perfectly sensible. What is not at all clear is whether that use of the term reason will map on to the specific ways analytic philosophers use them when they're writing philosophy papers. So when Parfit, in On What Matters, says you have a reason to do things independent of your gold standards or values, or however he's using the term, or invoking the concept of an external reason, you have a reason not to touch the hot stove. You have a reason not to be indifferent to your what's going to happen to you on Tuesday, in this future Tuesday indifferent scenario. Parfit might have said things like that, or very similar things to that. When Parfit's using that use of the term reason, no, the word reason, because my view of language is that there aren't fixed, rigid meanings to the words themselves. There's the way people happen to be using reason in everyday context. There's the way they use the reason. Someone like Parfit is using the word reason when he's writing On What Matters. And we could ask separate questions. What do people mean in those contexts? What does Parfit mean in this context? Just because someone knows or is familiar with or is competent with employing the concept or notion or term reason. So, and that word reason, no, it's polysemous. It's going to pick out a range of concepts. So you could say the word reason picks out a bunch of different possible concepts. Lots of those concepts are perfectly meaningful, perfectly tractable, perfectly, analyzable, explicable. You could explain what's meant by reason in this or that context. So if someone's, if I went to the store to get some milk and someone said, well, what reason did you have for going to the store? And I said, in order to get some milk. And someone said, okay, well, analyze that. Is that an unanalyzable user? No. What I mean by reason is it can be cashed out in terms of relational facts about my goals and the means of acting in accord with my goals. So what I mean by I had a reason is I had a desire, which is to get milk, and then getting milk satisfied the desire of getting milk. I mean, obviously, so there's nothing mysterious about this. You're talking about a relation between a certain psychological fact, a desire, and some certain fact about what the world is like. The world had milk, and then some relational fact between those facts, like getting milk would achieve the goal of getting milk. So you could explain what's reasons meant in that context. And that is how I explain this, philosophy's technical talk of normative reasons. I think if you understand normative reasons to refer to these desire-dependent reasons, perfectly meaningful, perfectly explicable. So what should I say? I do know what reason means, and it just means something that stands dependent and not stance independent or irreducible? In other words, like, no, it's not just stance dependent, it's reducible. It's reducible to certain types of descriptive facts. So for me, my reason for getting milk is reducible to a set of descriptive facts: the desire to get milk, the fact that there is milk at a particular location, and the relational fact, which is that by obtaining that milk, it would achieve the desire. It would like accord with, or it would be a success condition for the desire. So I can sort of unpack my use of the concept of reason in a way that reduces reasons to certain types of clusters of descriptive facts. So there's an analysis of reasons. Now, I could just say, there, boom, you have the correct account of reasons. I know what reasons are. Maybe Eric doesn't know what they are. Maybe moral realists and normative realists don't understand what reasons are. They're actually confused about this. They think reasons are irreducible and they don't understand the concept of reason. So one of the positions I could take is actually, yeah, sure, of course there's reasons. And it's actually the realists that are conceptually confused about the concept of a reason, and they don't have the correct concept. They have some misguided pseudo concept, and they're confused, and I got the right concepts. Maybe I should start framing it that way. Maybe I should just say, no, I have the concept. You don't have the concept. You're the one making the mistake. I mean, that wouldn't be totally inaccurate. So that's one way of construing it. Thing is, though, I don't think there is a correct account of the term reason, because words are polysemous. They can be used in lots of different ways. And so a word like reason, like what am I going to say if a realist says, no, but you have an irreducibly normative reason to, not touch a hot stove? Okay. Now, clearly, like in that context, they're invoking the use of the term reason to refer to a concept that I'm not referring to. So what am I going to say about that? My view of language is, like the words don't mean things. The people using the words mean things. People could use the term reason in an attempt to refer to these irreducibly normative considerations or facts or values or whatever. So sure, people could use it that way. I think they fail to refer. There isn't anything that could refer to, not just because the things don't exist, but because it wouldn't be meaningful. It'd be like if someone said, hey, you have a reason to, blibbity bibbity blue, or to, you have a reason to, help the Momroths get out grave. It's not going to be meaningful. It's just going to be word salad. So sure, I think people can use words to try to mean things that I don't think are meaningful. And so it's tough for me to say the word means this and not that, because I don't think words mean things.
It is for something to, for one thing to favor another.
I monologue there too long, so I lost track of where we're at.
Most of us
understand a little.
Constructivists seem to know what I mean. Lots of people who deny that there are stance-independent moral truths seem to know exactly what's being claimed. They just don't think that there are such things, but they don't deny that they can't understand what that is. So I guess if you know what a reason is, if you know what it is for something to, for one thing to favor another, most of us understand.
There you go. For one thing to favor another, what does that mean? And I'll get to the quote from Parfit, where this ends up just more or less being another way of saying the same thing. So if we're talking about irreducibly normative reasons or categorical reasons, and we say, well, these reasons, they refer to favoring relations, or what it means for something to be a reason for something is that it counts in favor, it favors doing that. It's just like giving you a synonym. So it's like if someone said, hey, everything's blorperific, and you say, well, what does that mean? And they say it's blorptastic, that's a synonym. So for things to be blorperific means they stand in blorping relations with other things. Like, that's not illuminating the concept. It's not explaining the concept. It's giving you just a set of other words that just mean the same thing. It's not actually doing anything to unpack or account for what it means. So favoring, what does that mean? Favoring. What? Favoring how? Favoring in what sense? We're not going to get I don't think we're going to get an explanation.
Understand that, like, you should, if you're hungry, you should go get something to eat. Why? Well, because by getting something to eat, you'll, relieve your hunger, and that's what you're.
Yeah, perfectly sensible use of the term reason. So you could cash out reasons here in terms of relations between desires and means of acting in accord with those desires. So perfectly sensible use of the term reason. But that's not the sense of reason that Parfit is talking about. That's not the sort of reasons that are allegedly given by stance-independent moral facts. So someone might say, well, the fact that it's morally wrong to steal gives you a reason to not steal. And the reason that you're given is external to. That's what's meant by an external reason. It's not dependent, and it's not determined by or made true by your goals, standards, or values. You ought not. You have a reason not to steal, regardless of your goals or values. That is the kind of reason that I think doesn't make sense. Not this kind, which sounds like a stance-dependent reason.
Worried about. So you see that, right? Yeah, most people see that. Now we might ask, like,
so no, he says most people see that. Empirical claim. Most people see that. Which people? How does he know? What most people, whether or not most people understand a particular use of a term, is an empirical question. I don't know of any empirical work that explores the sort of non-philosophical understanding, the lay understanding of the concept of a reason or various uses of the term reason. And I don't think there is research like this. There may be a little bit, but there's certainly nothing decisive. We certainly don't have substantive cross-cultural data on this. I mean, I'd be amazed. I say certainly, but I should say I'm pretty confident we don't have anything like that. So Eric here, note, just flag, is making a claim about human psychology, about what most people understand, without actually any data to suggest that most people understand this notion of a reason or any other notion of a reason. Philosophers do this a lot. They'll make claim, most people think this, most people believe this, most people recognize this, most people know this, most people find this intuitive, most people think this way, most people understand this. How do they know? The answer is they don't know this. These are speculative hypotheses about human psychology in the total absence of any substantive evidence. Maybe they have anecdotal evidence, often anecdotes based on speaking to students in English in a classroom setting, where that generalizing from that setting would be not very wise, because we already have enough data to know that generalizing from students in, say, a university in the United States is not going to generalize very well to the rest of the world's population across a wide range of psychological traits. There's very little reason to think that it would generalize in this case. Could, but you would need empirical evidence of that. So, you would need the second order empirical evidence to establish whether or not you would be empirically justified in extrapolating or generalizing in this case, which we don't have. So you wouldn't be justified. In fact, the evidence we do have would suggest you're probably not justified in generalizing in these cases. And, I've been over the reasons for that many times. Basically, a lot, Western world, the United States, for instance, there's an acronym for these sorts of societies: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And what the cross-cultural empirical data shows is that members of these communities, these cultures and societies, on average, tend to be substantially psychologically different from the rest of the world's population, which is more similar to one another on average than Americans are, or people from weird populations. So United States, Canada, UK. Again, this is about averages and statistically aggregating over people. It's not, this is treating populations at a very broad level of abstraction. It's not dealing with individuals. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of individual variation and tons of variation, within these populations. But just the general point is, if you did a psychological study on 100 random Americans, and then you took 100 random people from a bunch of different parts of the world, and you plotted their psychological traits along some measurable axis, the outlier in many cases will be people from the United States. And so there's just frequently statistical outliers that anchor one or the other extreme end of a distribution of some measurable psychological trait or behavior or whatever outcome measure that you're looking at. And so generalizing from direct one-on-one interactions with people in those populations, or classroom interactions, or the people around you, friends, family, it's just not going to generalize very well. So people that say, I've spoken a lot, or I've talked to lots of people and this is how they are. If you're talking about people in the US, you just don't have a good, there's thousands, there's 7,000 languages in the world. How does moral language and moral discourse look in the other 6,999 languages? Can we just generalize and assume, they speak this way in English, so they speak this way in all the other languages? No, it's not a reasonable assumption. And again, this isn't based on me just speculating that it's not. We do have data, and the data says, those are not justified inferences. Anyway, I don't want to belabor that point, because I'm sure many of you have heard it so many times.
Well, what makes it the case that when you're hungry, you ought to go eat something? One answer is, because that would satisfy my desire, and desire satisfaction is good, or something like that. Or another one is
perfectly good answer. Why don't we just end it there?
Well, because it would help you survive, and it's good for you to survive.
And what's meant by good? Why is it good for you to survive? Because you desire to survive?
My own view is that it's good for you to survive, and it's good for you to be, not be distracted by your hunger or something like that. So when I say that, I mean that it's not like you regard it as good. It's in fact good. So it doesn't depend on your.
So there are things like you could regard something as good. And I would unpack that as I regard it as, and it's going to depend on what I'm regarding as good. Like if I say I regard this chocolate as good, if you say, well, what do you mean? I'd say, well, I enjoy the taste of it. Of course, that would mean I would enjoy the taste of it like even if I ate 1 piece, 2 pieces, 10 pieces, a million pieces, by the million piece, well, I couldn't even physically eat a million pieces. Probably by the 5th piece, I wouldn't even like it anymore. I would like it up to a point. So there's certain contexts I could conceive of in which the consumption of the chocolate would be enjoyable. Like you could get really narrow and specific and hyper specific to a ridiculous degree if you wanted to, but you could cash out it being good in terms of it satisfying desires or prompting certain sorts of psychological states or according with certain sorts of outcomes that you wish to occur. So it could be cashed out in those terms. If this is not how Eric is cashing it out, how is he cashing it out? So I can tell you how I'm cashing it out. How do people that are realists cash it out?
Your attitudes. So, I mean, we understand what it is for there to be a reason for you to go get something to eat. All I want to say is, yeah, and the reason that.
So we understand what it is for there to be a reason for you to go get something to eat, right? Let's
you have regarded as good. It's in fact good. So it doesn't depend on your attitudes. So, I mean, we understand what it is for there to be a reason. That I mean that it's the goodness doesn't, it's not like you regard it as good. It's in fact good. So it doesn't.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's not that you regard it as good. It's not reducible to your attitudes, your preferences, desires. It is in fact good. What does that mean? It is good, meaning what? We're not. So again, I can tell you what I mean, but Eric's not telling us what he means by good. It's supposed like you're just expected to take this to be obvious and not in need of further. Like, I don't know, but there's not an explanation here.
Depend on your attitudes. So, I mean, we understand what it is for there to be a reason for you to go.
So we understand what it is for there to be a reason. Okay, who is we? I understand reasons to not be like Eric apparently understands them to be. So if I understand it, then I understand that Eric is wrong. So I would have to not understand reasons in order, you see what I'm saying here? Like the term reason, like there are multiple construals, and some of those construals could be depicted in ways that are mutually exclusive. In other words, one could say reasons just are normative reasons, facts about the relation between desires, like means and ends or something like that. And if one says that is just what reasons are, and that's exhaustive of what reasons are, then Eric's conception of reasons would be a misconception. It wouldn't be a correct conception of reasons. And so if we understand reasons the way I understand reasons, then Eric's notion of a reason is ruled out. And in fact, it almost constitutes a kind of oxymoron. So like on my view, normative reasons would be related to desires. And so the idea of a reason that's not related to desires it literally doesn't make sense. It's like a square that doesn't have 4 sides. It's a bit like that. And that's why I say I could invoke this as an analytic issue if I wanted to. So in virtue of my understanding of reasons, I understand that Eric doesn't understand what reasons are. Like he has a misconception about what they are. Should I be saying that? Maybe I should start saying that. Now, again, no one is like anyone that thinks of reasons that way is just going to say, no, you misunderstand what reasons are. These are both possible conceptions of reasons. And this conception of reason better accounts for moral reasons, something like that. Maybe again, I'm not attributing this to Eric, but it's something that a realist might say. Okay, why should I grant that? Like, why should I just defer to someone else claiming to have different concepts and a different understanding of things? If I have my understanding and you have your understanding, what methods, facts, considerations do we appeal to? One could just assert that their understanding is correct, but assertions aren't arguments. And I'm no more obliged to accept assertions from Eric or anyone else than they're accepted to accept my assertions. And so this is why this method of just like a priorizing our way to the truth here, I just don't think it's a very effective way of getting at the truth.
Go get something to eat. All I want to say is, yeah, and the reason that you have is some fact that doesn't depend on anyone's action.
So you're saying all I want to say is, I mean, that's, it's, hey, I think that there are squares, and all I want to say is that there are squares without 4 sides. So like, just because he thinks this isn't a big deal doesn't mean it wouldn't be a big deal to someone that takes my perspective on the matter. And I understand it wouldn't seem like a big deal to someone where it seems obvious or intuitive that there are reasons that don't depend on our desires, normative reasons or whatever. I don't think so. So to me, it sounds like someone saying something like the square thing. Now, again, I don't take this to be some sort of a priori matter. I think the issue is more complicated than that. I take an empiricist and pragmatic approach to this sort of thing. And I would have questions like, okay, well, your conception of reason, if it's not dependent on desires, could we like explore it in practice? What predictions could we make? I would want to employ some sort of pragmatic method of assessing the use of this term or this notion of reason that Eric's employing in some real world context and see whether its use would make any sort of potential observable difference in the world. And my guess is that it wouldn't. And so I would say, okay, well, this is like, I'm going to rule it out on pragmatic grounds. That would be my approach. I wouldn't take an a prioristic approach. But if I did, I would rule this out on definitional grounds. I think I've said that enough times. I don't need to keep saying it.
Here's another case. So like if there's a drowning child, most people agree that you should go save the child. Why should you go save the child?
So again, this would be a case where, sure, I think you should go save the child. So I don't have a problem with normative judgments. Eric's not suggesting otherwise, but the question would be, well, why, or what do people mean when they say that? And I don't think when people say, yeah, if there's a drowning child and you're in a position to save the child, that you should go save the child. I don't grant that when people say that in ordinary contexts, outside of philosophical contexts, that they're invoking Eric's notion of a reason or categorical or irreducible reasons. I think it's an open question what they may or may not mean by that. I certainly don't think they're going to agree with me, because I don't think that most people that use the term reason in everyday contexts have any explicit substantive commitments about whether or not there are irreducible or reducible reasons. I just don't think they have a position about it at all. And it would be a separate matter to cash out how they're using the language in those contexts. But I typically think in a lot of these cases that one's use of this terminology doesn't require a commitment one way or another on abstract philosophical issues. The example that Michael Gill gives in his 2009 paper about indeterminacy and variability in metaethics is mathematical Platonism. I've given this example many times before. Let's say, I don't know, you're adding up your taxes, you're paying a tip at a restaurant, whatever it is, you're doing math in everyday context. When you do that, do you need to take a position on whether numbers are like they're Platonic entities, and whether do you have to take a position on the ontology of numbers? No, you don't. You don't have to take a pro position or an anti position. It's not a feature of everyday discourse about mathematics. It's not a feature of it. And I think the same thing in the case of everyday uses of reason. I don't think everyday use of reason determinately invokes the notion of irreducible normativity or reducible normativity. I think that's just an inappropriate way of analyzing how people are using reason talk in everyday contexts. So if that's not what we're talking about, everyday contexts, what context are we talking about? Because you have to be careful between the vacillation between how philosophers are using terms and how ordinary people are using terms. If Eric wants to say philosophers understand these irreducibly normative reasons, that would be one claim. It'd be quite another claim to say that ordinary people understand or implicitly employ the notion of irreducible normativity. I'm going to take that to be an empirical claim, and I'm going to ask for empirical evidence that non-philosophers, when they use the term reason, that there are substantive contexts in which they invoke the notion of an irreducible normative reason. I don't think there is any empirical evidence to suggest that that's true. And I don't think anecdotal evidence is going to be anywhere near sufficient to establish that, for the reasons I've already outlined. If your anecdotal evidence consists of your personal experiences, it's not gathered in a systematic way. It's not gathered in a way where you have you're not doing any experimental work. You're not gathering in a systematic way. You don't have, because think about it. It's based on your memories of experiences that you had with all the potential biases you would have on how do you interpreted your interactions with people in the first place. If that was an appropriate way to make empirical claims, we wouldn't need to do experimental psychology. We could just figure out facts about human personality and human psychology by thinking about it. Just, what are the people I've interacted with like? This is what people's personalities are like. But it turns out that doesn't work at all. In fact, it's outrageously difficult to make substantive inferences about human psychology, about personality and stuff like that. Even if you have access to thousands of people, even if you have really good methods of randomization, even if you have very robust and well-validated surveys, take something like the Big Five personality survey. Is that going to give us this perfect laser-focused guide into human personality? Absolutely not. At best, we have sloppy, fuzzy, it's difficult to make inferences about predict individual behavior from these sorts of metrics. So psychologists have a hell of a time figuring out generalizations about human psychology when they have access to rigorously gathered systematic data from thousands and in some cases tens or hundreds of thousands of people. The idea that you could figure out what people think or how everyone thinks or how people use terms or concepts by thinking about how you think they use terms or concepts it's not a plausible way of doing this. These are empirical questions. And if you don't think they're empirical questions, then I'm going to disagree on your underlying assumptions. So then we're going to have that discussion, and we're going to have a metaphilosophical discussion, which again, many philosophers will skip over or not want to have, or they're just, why is their account of language correct and mine is incorrect? Why are their methods good methods and my methods are not good methods? There's all sorts of questions to have here. And I'm not invoking totally like outlandish approaches to these things. It's William James, Wittgenstein, like there are long traditions of philosophers that have challenged, you could say, the status quo or mainstream views in analytic philosophy over the past century or so. You have pragmatists, you have ordinary language philosophy, you have the logical positivists, you have Wittgenstein, you have experimental philosophy more recently, and these are all traditions that resonate with me and that I have various degrees of sympathy towards. And I would not endorse relegating them to the sidelines and ruling them out of court by simply employing methods and presuppositions that those traditions and individuals have argued against. You're helping yourself to assumptions that are up for grabs or are being challenged by them. And you can do that. And there's nothing wrong with working within the paradigm that you want to work in. But if I'm saying, okay, but I reject your paradigm, it's a little weird to just, I just find something strange about being so dismissive of paradigms that are not your own paradigm.
My own view is you should save the child because it will cause suffering to his family, and the kid is valuable in his own right. It's valuable for his own sake. He's intrinsically valuable, and when something's valuable, you should try to preserve it or protect it. That's why you should go save him. Now, so
what is categorical normativity? What notion of reasons is he invoking? So the reasons, I think, don't depend on desires, but what is categorical? We haven't been told. We just haven't been given an explanation.
I just told you why I should go save him. Most people are not like, what? What are you talking about? You should go save him because he's valuable.
Right, but do you think I would have that reaction? Like if someone said, hey, you should go save that child because if you allowed them to die, it would cause suffering to their family, and that would be a really terrible thing. Would I react by going, oh, but what do you mean? Of course not. So I don't know what position or view or like Eric takes himself to be arguing against, but this is not my reaction, and it's not a reaction I would advocate anybody having. If someone started asking me, hey, do you think we should save the drowning child in the river? I would think they're already wasting too much time and that they or I should already be jumping in that river to be pulling them out. This is not a psychologically or practically accurate representation of how I would react to this sort of thing. And so if this is intended to be a reflection of my reaction to this, it's not accurate. That's not my reaction to this. It's not, what are you talking about?
I don't even understand what you're talking about. But note what I did there was I cited a reason to go save the kid. And the reason is because he's valuable.
So if he says because he's valuable, like, what do you think? You think I don't think people are valuable? It's just, I understand people being valuable to mean that I value them. Like this isn't an issue. Like, I think food is tasty. I don't think it has the intrinsic property of tastiness. What I construe that in terms consistent with anti-realism. So all the discourse that Eric is invoking here is perfectly consistent with anti-realist discourse. There's nothing that would prevent an anti-realist who does not think people are intrinsically valuable because they have the property of valuableness to say that people are valuable. Of course I think people are valuable. But I don't think realists own this sort of language. So I just wouldn't have this reaction. And this is kind of a strange characterization of my views. So I don't really know what's going on here with this example.
The fact that he's valuable doesn't depend on anyone's attitudes. He's valuable not because.
Well, yeah, that's where I might disagree. I'd say, well, it does depend on attitudes, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to disagree about the normative content. And so you see, I mean, this is pretty similar to normative entanglement because there's this normative stuff embedded with the metaethical stuff. So I'd be like, yeah, I disagree about that part. But like, imagine someone says, hey, I think you should rescue people because everybody's intrinsically valuable because value was instilled in them by God. Do you disagree? Does it make sense to you? Like, sure, that makes sense to me. That actually is a case where parts of that, like God gives people value. If it's irreducibly normative value, then I'm going to have an issue. But like their view, yeah, they think God gives people value. Weird, but whatever. I might say, look, I agree that people are valuable, but I don't think that God is part of it. You could disagree with some things and agree with other parts. So I would agree with the normative content of what Eric is saying here, but I disagree with this metanormative content. And it doesn't amount to any practically substantive difference in these particular cases. So I'd be like, I agree, right up until he gets to this part where he says, and it doesn't depend on anybody's stance or attitudes. So I just say, whoa, hold up. I was with you right until that part. I think it does depend on people's stances or attitudes. And then we proceed. So there's a point where we disagree. Now, I would also say, I also don't think it makes any sense to talk about people being valuable, independent of anybody's goals or attitudes. I think people value things, but I don't think that things have value independent of people valuing things. People value things. That is the only meaningful sense in which things are valuable is to the extent that they are or could be valued. So that's how I view it. It's, yeah, are there underlying metaphysical differences and other sorts of differences between our views? Absolutely. I don't think that they make substantial practical. I don't think there's substantial practical differences between our views in terms of how we would conduct ourselves in the real world. And so this comes down to an abstract academic dispute about concepts and maybe metaphysical considerations where we disagree on some of those issues. And it's not a matter where I simply think that those views are mistaken. I think that the views are not meaningful. I don't even know what the big deal with that is. Like, why can't I think another, like, what would be the problem with thinking that a view is not meaningful? I don't know why that should be taken to be such an outrageous position to take, whereas thinking it's false isn't an outrageous position.
Because I value him, but because he's good. He's good for his own sake. Most people sort of understand. They don't like have any sort of like, what do you...
So again, good for its own sake. So insofar as Eric is invoking notions of realist conceptions of value, he then says, take a look.
You're talking about any point, but on his attitudes, he's valuable not because I value him, but because he's good. He's good for his own sake. Most people sort of understand. They don't like have any sort of...
Most people understand that. That's an empirical claim. Do most people understand the notion of irreducible normativity? Well, so there's separate questions. What, conditional on me being right? Nobody understands it because there isn't something to understand. So then there would be the second question. Most people take themselves to understand or seem to understand or would claim to understand. And no, Eric did say initially, like people, like when he talked about philosophers thinking about this, like they seem to understand it. So that was careful and good phrasing on Eric's part. So in this case, the claim would be that most people, like if the claim is most people do understand, well, if I'm right, then they couldn't. So if the claim is most people seem to understand or would claim to understand or would take themselves to understand, that's an empirical claim about human psychology. Do we have evidence that is true? Now, as far as philosophers, I think it probably is true that most of them would claim to understand. As far as non-philosophers, I don't know. Do they? That's an empirical question. What does the data say? Data doesn't really support this claim. So this is psychological speculation without supporting data.
Sort of like, what are you talking about at any point? But all I've done there is I've just said.
I doubt anyone would be like, whoa, what are you talking about? But again, I wouldn't react that way because I would just construe things in anti-realist terms.
Look, that's a reason to go do a thing, and it's a stance independent reason. It holds not in virtue of...
Yeah, so stance independent reason. Do most non-philosophers understand what stance independent reasons are, or would they claim to understand what they are? I mean, these are tough questions. Like, I mean, one, do they claim or seem to understand what they are? I don't think that there's evidence of that. If they claim or seem to understand what they are, do they understand what they are? That's a separate thing you would have to establish. I mean, one is it would have to be true that they're understandable for people to, in fact, understand them, which is precisely the matter of contention here. So if I'm right, and this notion of stance-independent reasons or categorical reasons or irreducibly normal, like stance-independent reasons, actually, that's, well, stance-independent reason is a weird. Stance-independent moral facts are intelligible in some cases and not intelligible in other cases. They're only not intelligible when you bake in notions like external reasons or categorical or irreducible normativity. But naturalists would just say, well, stance-independent moral facts are a certain type of descriptive fact, and so they would be intelligible in that view. But if the notion here is specifically the notions that I'm claiming are unintelligible, whether or not ordinary people understand those, by ordinary people, I mean people without substantive philosophical training, whether they understand those questions is an empirical claim. I very much doubt Eric has access to that sort of data because I don't think that data exists. No one's collected it. And even if you had that data, it would still be a separate question. Like if a bunch of people claim to understand it, it wouldn't follow that therefore it's understandable. It would be some evidence that it's understandable, but take some other term or concept that I would take to be meaningless or conceptually confused, something like the Christian notion of the Trinity. It very well might be that tons and tons of Christians, like it could be 1 billion plus people on the planet, would say, yeah, I think the Trinity is a correct description of Christian theology and it's real, I would just take all those people to be mistaken and confused. So you could have a whole lot of people that are convinced of something that's not meaningful. So that would just be my position if people did claim that or purport to the concepts in question. There's nothing impossible or terribly implausible about a whole bunch of people being mistaken or conceptually confused about stuff. And, just port this over to people being wrong about other sorts of stuff. Folk physics is going to be wrong about a lot of stuff. Folk biology is going to be wrong about a lot of stuff. Without substantive training in the science, special sciences or philosophy, a lot of people are going to be very misguided and wrong and confused and mistaken about a great deal of things. And this could just be another one of them.
Anyone's attitudes. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You could say like, well, I just don't get it. And look, I mean, for anything that you're trying to explain to someone, if they just keep saying.
So notice, for anything you're trying to explain to someone, but I don't think he's explained what the terms and concepts mean. So yeah, for anything you're trying to explain to someone, if you don't explain it, then how are they supposed to understand it?
I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it.
So, and this isn't a fair characterization of how I've responded. It's not someone's trying to explain stuff to me and I'm just saying, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. I have a lot to say about this. I don't just sit around going, I don't get it. What are you talking about? I don't get it. I don't read the books. I don't read the papers. I talk to people. I seek out conversations. I talk about this stuff every day. It's not that I'm just going, I don't get it. What am I? Like it depicts me as just some like I'm not trying and I'm just stubbornly insisting I don't get it. That's not what's going on at all. It's not even like I'm trying to grasp it and people keep trying to explain it. It's more that they're not even, as far as I'm concerned, doing much at all to explain it. And I'm pointing this out and saying, hey, appeals to purportedly unanalyzable concepts where your main claim to the obvious intelligibility of these claims is that everyone already gets it. I'm saying that seems like a problem to me because I'm not granting that everybody already gets it. And I grant that philosophers claim to understand it. What is it that they claim to understand? Can y'all tell me what it is that they're claiming to understand? And the answer appears to be no. Or you get these really bare bones explanations or non-explanations. You get synonyms. You get examples that don't really do anything. There's not much here. There's not much here. And it looks to me like a bunch of verbal smoke and mirrors with no substance. This looks like a totally vacuous non-explanation to me.
Then at some point you're going to say, well, I don't know, maybe philosophy is not your thing. Maybe you should go do something else.
Now, this is the concept that stood out to me, and you see that I put it in the thumbnail. Let's have a listen.
Or
I'm going to take a quick break so you could consider that remark, and then we're going to come back to that. But yeah, I do need a quick break. And do throw some comments in the comment section if you got them, and I'll be right back in a minute. Okay, we are good, and I'm going to take it back so we could hear that part again.
explain to someone, if they just keep saying, I don't get it, I don't get it, I don't get it, then at some point you're gonna have to say, well, I don't know, maybe philosophy's not your thing. Maybe you should go.
Maybe philosophy is not your thing. So look at what Eric has implied here. Eric is implying that philosophy is not my thing. Now, I'd like to know what you think. I was struggling with how to react to this because I wasn't sure if it was going to like bother me to have someone tell me this. But this, if I'm going to be honest, strikes me as a little bit rude. It strikes me as a kind of a rude remark to make about me. And I don't think I've made rude remarks about. And I'm trying my best because this person criticizing my views, and I'm reacting to that. And this is someone saying, yeah, well, in virtue of your position on these philosophical issues, what, I should quit philosophy because I don't think about these matters the way that Eric does? Philosophy is not for me because I don't share his perspective, or I think his view is misguided or conceptually confused. I don't think Eric should do philosophy. I think philosophy is for Eric. And I don't think that's a very nice thing to say, that if someone doesn't share your perspective on the matter, that they should, this isn't your thing. Like, is the implication that I'm not good at philosophy, that I'm not competent to do philosophy? This seems like not a critique of my position, but a critique of me personally. And that just doesn't seem like an appropriate way of responding to someone's perspective on the matter, to imply that philosophy is not their thing. I mean, imagine if I came in here and I said something like this. Look, I get it. I know that reasons just have to be dependent on desires. And so all these realists out there, these non-naturalist realists that think that reasons are independent of desires, there's all this irreducible normativity, they're all just so conceptually confused that, if they just can't get it, if they can't get it the way I do, maybe philosophy is not their thing. Maybe philosophy isn't Mike Humer's thing. Maybe philosophy isn't David Enoch's thing because they don't get it. That strikes me as a just kind of not a nice thing to say about one's colleagues, to suggest that if they don't share your perspective and your approach, and they think that there might be a problem with your concepts and your perspective and your take on things, that philosophy isn't your thing. What kind of remark is that? I don't know. I want to hear in the comments from people what you make of that. Now, I don't look, I'm not like angry with Eric or like upset about this, but I didn't, and maybe this is meant in a more general sense and it's not directed at me, but in the context of this discussion, it sure seems like it is. And it sure seems like the implication here is that it's not simply that I have a different perspective that is worth sharing at the philosophical table, but that maybe I'm just so out to lunch on this issue that I should go do something else. And I have had people suggest this to me before, that if you're not going to approach the issue in our way, if you're not going to share our assumptions, if you don't understand things the way that we do, maybe you should just go do something else. That I don't take that to be a very open-minded or accepting position on philosophy. I do think there are contexts where you might want to say that to somebody. Like if someone's like, I hate all logic and I'm just going to say nonsense all the time. I could see contexts where someone could take, and from Eric's perspective, maybe Eric doesn't understand my view on the matter. Maybe that Eric's position is that I haven't really thought this through and I'm just going, I don't get it. But that's not what I'm doing. I have a particular approach to philosophical issues where I take this empiricist and pragmatic approach to things. And in virtue of that approach, I think that certain terms, concepts, and positions that people take are not meaningful. I often end up taking a quietist position on various philosophical topics. So I think a lot of what people say about free will is not meaningful. I think a lot of what people say about consciousness is not meaningful. And the thing is, Eric is right when he says that like positions like mine, they're more popular like on Twitter or something than they are in the academic literature, but they're not totally absent from that literature. And so you do have people like Wittgenstein that would have said that a whole bunch of stuff is nonsense. Now, Wittgenstein may have meant something somewhat different for me, but Wittgenstein would have had a very, very critical attitude of the heavy-duty metaphysics that it looks like Eric is invoking and that many other people are invoking. And it wouldn't just come down to saying, these positions are meaningful but false. A lot of it would come down to saying that a lot of the problems are pseudo-problems due to confusions about language. And it would be very, very similar to the sort of position that I take. Is philosophy not Wittgenstein's thing? Now, I'm not saying I'm as good or insightful or as thoughtful as Wittgenstein is, but what I'm saying, that's not the comparison. The point of the comparison is like I'm expressing a similar approach to philosophy metaphilosophically, and many other people do. And, many of us are not going to be the greatest or most influential people, but we're representing a particular perspective and metaphilosophical approach. Is philosophy not our thing? Is philosophy not William James's thing? Like for people that take these different approaches, that as a result of their approaches and their disposition and their way of thinking about these things, arrive at different conclusions. And those conclusions end up entailing that other people's positions aren't just false, but not meaningful. Is philosophy not their thing? So no, for instance, that Pete Bandick's paper, Qualia Quietism, Pete takes a quietist view towards the concept of phenomenal states or qualia. Is philosophy not Pete's thing? Is that an implication of this? Because it seems like it would be. So that seems like an issue to me. And so I want to pause here and come back to this to show you a passage. In fact, I'll just leave it up here and I'll just read the passage. Maybe I could find a quote of it somewhere. Give me a moment. I should be able to put this up here. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, it's on my blog. The first thing I found. One second, just tracking it down. Oh, right. So I'm going to show you this passage. And I might read the rest of the passage from the book, just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from on the matter. All right, let's zoom that in a little bit so you can see it. And it's this quote here. All right. Now, this is a quote from On What Matters, Volume 2, from Derek Parfit. And this is Parfit commenting on Bernard Williams. Now, if you look up Bernard Williams is one of the most prominent philosophers of the 20th century, by no means someone without influence or substantive things to say on philosophical issues. And I'm going to read for you, and you can see it here, what Bernard Williams says about it and about Parfit's concept of an external reason. And this is very much related to the notion of reasons that Eric is articulating here. Okay, so let's go through the passage. When Williams argues that there are no such reasons, his main claim is that externalists cannot explain what it could mean to say that we have some external reason. I admit that when I say that we have some reason, or that we should or ought to act in a certain way, what I mean cannot be helpfully explained in other terms. I could say that when some facts gives us a reason to act in some way, this fact counts in favor of this act. But this claim adds little, since, quote, counts in favor of, end quote, means roughly, quote, gives us a reason for, end quote. Williams suggests that the phrase has a reason does not have any such intelligible, irreducibly normative external sense. When he discusses statements about such external reasons, Williams calls these statements mysterious and obscure and suggests that they mean nothing. Several other writers make similar claims. Let me read that last part again. Williams calls these statements mysterious and obscure and suggests that they mean nothing. Several other writers make similar claims. This is right in Parfit. Is philosophy not Bernard Williams' thing? Because Bernard Williams expressed the same view I did, that these terms mean nothing. This is not my view, that I didn't invent the view. This view was already out there. And I think that that's important. I think that that's important because it's right in one of the most prominent articulations from one of the most prominent non-naturalist realists, that a colleague of Parfit's, an extremely prominent, famous philosopher, had a very similar view. Should we rule Bernard Williams out? Why does Bernard Williams not count? Now, I think that this passage is really interesting for a few reasons. I mean, one is this part here, where Parfit is pretty frank in saying, like, this notion of like favoring relations, it's just synonyms, it's just circular, it's not going to help you explain what the terms mean. So Parfit's pretty upfront about saying, yeah, I can't explain what these terms mean. There's not any helpful way to explain them that isn't just circular. So you have that problem. And it's very clear from this passage that Williams is taking a similar position on the matter to me. And so I'm really puzzled when, is this a popular view? No. But it is a view, and it's not just a view held in a random paper published in 1984. This is a view that was expressed recently in one of those prominent works that covers metaethics, of normative ethics and other stuff too, like one of the most famous prominent works from one of the most famous prominent people. Like, I'm not saying that lends credibility to it in any direct sort of way, but what I'm saying is this is well within the radar, well within the ballpark of views that are expressed by extremely prominent people within the field recently. So it's kind of weird when I'm like, yeah, that I'm with Williams on that. That I'm treated like almost like I'm some kind of outsider. Like I'm not even like where is this coming from? Why do you think Williams thought that? You know? And then Williams had access to all these people that could have explained the terms and concepts. So this is why I would say, like, how come Williams didn't think? Why did Williams think this is unintelligible? Was philosophy not his thing? It's a little strange. So the rest of that passage is kind of interesting. So I'll read a bit more from Parfit. So Parfit says this, and this is, if you want to look it up, it's on page 272. And again, that's volume 2. So he says, when I claim that Williams and I use different concepts of a reason, I am assuming that each of us knows what he himself means. But that might not be true. People sometimes fail to understand not what other people mean, but even what they themselves mean. I completely agree with Parfit here. Now, note, he just says, look, Parfit, like Williams and I are using different concepts of a reason. Yeah, same thing between Eric and I. I'm using a different concept of a reason. And I don't just grant that both concepts are equally intelligible, and I don't just grant that both are equally viable as like good construals of how to use this terminology. And it's entirely possible. I mean, note what he says. People sometimes fail to understand not only what other people mean, but even what they themselves mean. This is my claim. Parfit said it. Parfit seems to acknowledge explicitly, with respect to the concepts I'm saying are not intelligible, that he himself could fail to understand what he means. I agree with Parfit. He's saying it's possible. I'm saying it's true. He's saying maybe I do fail to understand what I mean by these concepts. Of course, he doesn't think that, but he thinks it could happen. I'm saying it did happen. Parfit failed to understand. Eric failed to understand. Other non-naturalist realists that are using these concepts failed to understand. And I think that they failed to understand not for reasons I totally pulled out of a hat, but for the standard run-of-the-mill mundane reasons that you could find right in Wittgenstein and right in other critics of much of the methods and presumptions of analytic philosophy, which is that I think they got tripped up over the terms and concepts in pretty identifiable ways that you could identify in other contexts as well, like in the case of phenomenal consciousness that Monday talks about in his paper on qualia quietism and meta-illusionism. So what I'm articulating here may not be a prominent view on this specific issue, and it may not be a prominent view in general among contemporary analytic philosophers. There's a reason for that. I mean, they might say, well, it's because you're wrong. Well, if you have the view that these sorts of, if you have the view that the sorts of terms and concepts that they're using end up not being meaningful, for many of us, this is often rooted in underlying problems in the methods and presuppositions that people in the field are employing. And if you think that those are deeply flawed, you don't have a lot of incentives to continue being in a field where that's the ascendant perspective, that's the paradigm, that's the zeitgeist, the operating way in which most people do their work. Because if you don't share their assumptions, you feel some pressure to leave. Imagine if you wanted to do astronomy, you wanted to find exoplanets, and you wanted to do all that, and you go to school to do astronomy, and it turns out they start telling you about Geminis and Libras and Sagittarius and all Capricorns. And it turned out something like 80% of the people in astronomy classes pursuing astronomy degrees were using astrology. I think that would be quite a concern. And if you found astrology, like it's ridiculous. Like I don't endorse it at all. And if you wanted to do astronomy well, but everybody wanted to do astrology, they might say, look, if you don't buy in to Gemini and Sagittarius and Capricorn, maybe astronomy is not for you. They could say something like that. And you might feel considerable pressure to go, you know what? You're right. I'm going to go do something else. And that is kind of what my experience doing philosophy has been like. That I don't agree with a lot of mainstream methods and approaches to doing things. And the attitude isn't why, let's have a discussion. I see a lot of people dismissing my perspective and similar perspectives. People that are illusionists about consciousness, what I rarely see are substantive critiques. Like, here's why illusionists are wrong. What I see are people scoffing at them, saying it's obviously absurd. I see ridicule, scorn, some social pressure to reject the view. I see attempts to show that the views have ridiculous implications that are usually deeply misguided. I see basically a lot of very terrible objections, and terrible objections that aren't just terrible because I think they're wrong. The objections look to me like the proponents of them aren't even taking the view seriously to begin with. It doesn't mean people don't take the view seriously to begin with, but it sure seems like a lot of people just don't even want to waste their time with the sorts of perspectives I take on philosophical issues. They just want to move on to the other stuff. And from their perspective, that might be understandable. Be very understandable. Like if I showed up, imagine I went to, like I was in the field of theology and I kept having, well, what about my atheist perspective? What about my atheist perspective? A lot of theologians would just say, look, we're already settled on the God stuff. We want to talk about other stuff. And I feel like this is a little similar to that, where if your approach isn't within the mainstream, there's some degree of, okay, well, why don't you pack up your shit and leave kind of attitude. And it's not a nice feeling. And unfortunately, philosophy is my thing, and I am going to stick around. So I'm going to keep making my critiques, and hopefully the people that have that attitude will sit down and have conversations with me. I want to have conversations with them. I enjoy it. I love hearing about different people's perspectives. I'm an atheist. Most of my well, I don't know if I'd say most, but many people close to me are religious. I love talking about their religious views with them and the dynamics and the specifics of it. I don't have to share their views to appreciate hearing their perspective on those things. I like hearing different perspectives. I like having people around me that have different attitudes about things. Now, if it comes to like normative and applied ethical issues, if they have really horrendous views, that's a separate question. But when it comes to abstract stuff, like one of my good friends has like a kind of like this Pythagorean view. Mathematics is the sort of fundamental foundation of reality, and like everything is math in a way. And I think it's a fascinating view. It's very much at odds with my own view, but I love to hear about it. And I do wish that a perspective like mine, perspective shared with Bernard Williams, is a perspective that proponents of non-naturalist realism would want to hear about, would want to talk about. And if they're very confident that I'm mistaken, which many of them appear to be, okay, that's awesome. I'd love to hear about like their position on why I'm mistaken. Look, I'm pretty confident about my views, maybe too confident. Maybe I should temper my confidence on these matters and be more receptive. I sometimes have found myself being a bit bombastic. Maybe I'm compensating a bit for, always feeling like an underdog in a lot of these discussions. And maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't have that attitude. Maybe I should be more chill about things. But I really want to have friendly discussions about this stuff. And I hope Eric and I have a chance to talk about this stuff. But philosophy is my thing. Maybe regrettably. So, I'm still sharing this image. So that's really what I wanted to get to in that. But let's go back and see if there's more to see in the video. Let's keep going, see where it goes. And let's see in the chat. Let's see if people said some interesting stuff. Should clear my throat like that on here. And I got really thirsty. I've been at this for a while. So give me a second. Looking through the comments. You're saying you don't have access to mystical, inexplicable properties and categories? Huh, I thought everyone did. Huh, that's weird. Yeah, that's kind of my, if I'm being honest, my perspective on this is that I suspect that a lot of these concepts they're partially motivated by religious beliefs, Christianity, monotheism, and its influence on Western philosophy. And, the short version is that I favor something like a cultural debunking argument against non-naturalist moral realism. Or I think that the reason people are drawn to non-naturalist moral realism is because they are saturated in a culture with this Manichaean conception of a division between the cosmic forces of good and evil. You see this manifest outside of Christianity. Like, think of Dungeons and Dragons alignments: lawful good, lawful evil. There's like good and evil. There's these cosmic forces, and there's just things are evil, things are good, independent of us. They're not determined by our cultures. I think this is everywhere, and I think that this causes people to think about morality in those terms, to think of it as outside of themselves, because in this Christian view, like God has put all this into motion. And when philosophy becomes secularized and you drop God out of the picture, there's still this sense that lingers. And I think that has continued to influence people to externalize the sense of good and evil in this dichotomous way. And they have the sense that things are good and things are bad, and that it's not up to us. And I think that it's just pervasive in our culture, and it feeds itself back into philosophy, and that people, for after several thousands of years of having the sense that purpose and meaning come from the outside, that there's this cosmic narrative and story that we're all a part of that gives a sense of grand purpose and epic meaning and value to life. When you take that all away and you're left with this secular worldview where it's, we're bags of chemicals or whatever, this like goofy perspective that there's no value in this atheistic world. I think there's some motivation to want there to not just be the physical world, but this moral stuff out there. And I think there's other motivations behind why people are drawn to this view. But I think it lends itself towards the conceivability of the view, not just the appeal of the view. And I think in other words, I think it's rooted in these sort of monotheistic and religious influences, and also a fair share of like Platonic stuff and bad metaphysics from Western philosophy. And I think that influences people to think in these terms. And if we understood the psychology of how people came to think this way, I think they'd have a better sense of why this isn't a good way to think about things. I don't think it follows like, hey, here we have explained why they think this way, therefore it's wrong. I don't think it works like that. It's just that I think once you put the explanation for why people think this way in perspective, and you zoom out and you see what's going on there, I think it shows why people would be drawn to this view, in spite of the fact that it's not true and in some cases doesn't make sense. And this is not just views about morality, but views about free will and consciousness and other sorts of stuff. I think a lot of it is rooted in the sort of religious and distinctive cultural origins of Western philosophy. Okay. Oscar asks, is your view of meaning consistent with people not knowing what they mean with words sometimes? Yeah, I think so. I think so. Sorry, still looking through comments. Okay. So that's it for the comments. Thanks everybody else for the other comments. I didn't see it. It wasn't a question or something. You could also do that like at me if you really want to direct a question at me. But I look through the comments. I like to engage with people in the audience. Okay, let's continue.
Go do something else, or I don't know what else to tell you. But you asked me like, what do you say to those kinds of people? These are the kinds of things that will come out of my mouth. If they're not satisfied with them, then from there I'm like, I don't have much more to say. I don't know what to. I want to help, but I don't know what else to say.
So what about the worry? Perhaps. What about the worry that it seems maybe like we'd have to commit ourselves to something extra, including categorical normativity? So perhaps we might think this is it seems like this is what Olson was referring to in this 2014 book, Moral Area Theory, that we could account for reasons just in terms of like instrumental, like if this corresponds to the satisfaction of my desires or the fulfillment of my goals or something of that sort. And we could account for every single talk of reasons or anything of that sort, including the examples you gave. I should go eat is because I have the goal of staying alive and I'm hungry right now. And so, if I don't eat, then I will die or something of that sort. And if I didn't have that kind of desire or goal, then I really wouldn't have that reason. What is your kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, so Olson is a normative error theorist. So he says, look, to the extent that we have any reasons at all, they're only like these purely descriptive facts. So like maybe you have a reason to
sounds like my view,
get something to eat. But all that means is you desire to get something to eat. And there's a way, the most efficient way of doing that, or like one way of doing that, is to go get something to eat. So like but notice that all those are purely descriptive claims. They're not normative claims. And he's like, yeah, that's right. Because I don't believe that there's any normativity at all. I'm not just a moral error theorist. I'm a everything error theorist. So he doesn't think that there are reasons for belief, except for this, like you want to believe the truth and the evidence suggests that P is true. So he doesn't think you have a reason to believe P. He just thinks the most efficient way to satisfy your desire.
Sounds like a great view. I'm on board with that. Just add to that also the realist concepts are not meaningful.
is for you to believe P. So that's not a reason, because there's no normative language. It's all descriptive. You desire to believe P, or you desire to believe the truth. P is true. So given that desire, the best way to satisfy it is to believe P. All purely descriptive things. Now, once you say, oh, but so there you have no reasons at all on that view. I happen to think that, like, no, there, in addition to all these descriptive facts that you just pointed out, Olson, it's also the case that I have a reason to believe P. It would be a good idea. I'd be justified in believing P. It makes sense for me to believe P. I would be rational if I believe P. All those terms that I just used, I have a good reason. It would be a good idea. It would be rational. We justify. Those are all normative terms, which means that there's a reason. That is, there's something favoring doing that. So I think, like, yeah, you can say, like, there just are no reasons facts, but I guess I think you're leaving out something like as plausible as anything in philosophy. That is, that you have reasons for belief, you have reasons for action, and he's willing to say no. Now there's some.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as plausible according to what standard? How do we determine what's plausible? Like, is it just based on intuitions or his personal judgments? Doesn't seem plausible to me. Seems like one of the least plausible things. Olson's account sounds great to me. We don't need anything else. So why would Olson leave all that stuff out?
Some people who aren't willing to go as far as Olson, they're saying, no, you do have reasons, but the only reasons that you have are to satisfy your desires. Now, one question about that is, it sounds like one way of hearing that is you're committed to the idea that here's a stance independent truth. Whenever you can satisfy your desires, you ought to do it. Is that what you mean? Do you mean that anytime there's a desire?
So, of course, if someone doesn't think that there's stance independent truths, they're not going to think that there's stance independent truth that you have a reason to do that. I mean, you could hold that view. That sounds more like a normative view than a metaethical view.
That you have? You have a...
It sounds like some type of like egoism, some ethical egoist position. Doesn't sound like a metaethical position.
A reason to satisfy it? Like you ought to go satisfy it? If so, then that means that you're committed to this sort of like stance independent claim that you should go, that what you ought to do is go satisfy your desires. Instead, what you might mean is like, no, because I don't want to be committed to these like stance independent truths that, and I, including the stance independent truth that I ought to go satisfy my desires. So you might just say, no, what a reason is just, some fact that will help you satisfy your desires or something like that. Then I guess I'd want to know, why is that the case? I mean, that's certainly not just what the word reason means. It doesn't fall out of the word reason. So why would that be? I mean, I guess some people would say, oh, well, because I don't want to be committed to any metaphysical stuff. I guess I'd want to say, I mean, I don't have those, like, I'm not worried about that at all. Like, I guess I think, look, the world is weird. We've always known it's weird. If we need to have favoring relations to explain very commonsensical claims, like you.
Yeah, see, we need favoring relations to explain commonsensical claims. That's the thing. I am denying that Eric's claims are commonsensical. And I haven't heard any good rebuttal or counter to that. And I think it's a mistake when moral anti-realists concede that ground to realists. When they concede, these are commonsensical claims. And error theorists tend to do this. This tends to be part of error theory to say, when people make moral claims, they're trying to do this. They're trying to refer to these stance independent facts. It's just that they're failing to do so because there are no such facts. And often this seems to me to be granting something where, when did we figure out that was true, that this is a common sense or intuitive position? What's that based on? If it's based on armchair claims about human psychology, where's the empirical evidence for that? If it's based on the empirical evidence, that's what I study, and I don't think the empirical evidence supports that. And, I wrote my paper on that. So if it's not empirical, I don't think that you're going to have a good case. If it is empirical, I don't think the case supports it. And so Eric seems to be helping himself to the presumption here that that the realist position is a common sense position. I think that's not true. And I'm not saying it's not meaningful. I'm saying it's not true. I think it's false.
You ought to believe the truth. Even if you want to believe, what's pleasant to you, you still ought not to do that. You ought to believe the truth, and you ought to not stab people. Even if you really want to stab them, you shouldn't stab them. In order to accommodate those sorts of claims, we need these stance independent normative truth. And so if you say to me like, oh, but those are spooky, you're appealing to something like a principle of parsimony. But the principle of parsimony says you shouldn't multiply entities beyond necessity. Necessity for what? Necessity for accounting for the phenomenon that you're trying to explain and understand.
Right. So this is an important point. So yeah, okay. So parsimony, don't multiply entities beyond necessity. You want as simple of an explanation as possible. for the phenomena that you're trying to explain, for the observations. So, if I saw a bunch of giraffes run by, it would be a little weird to conclude giraffes did not run by, because that's simpler than believing that they did run by. No, I had an observation. I should try to explain it. And the explanation might be something like, someone put LSD in my drink and I hallucinated, or there was a breakout at the local zoo, or I'm in a simulation. There's lots of possible explanations for the phenomenon. I mean, one would be that didn't happen. I have a false memory or something like that. But the observation occurred. As long as I think I appear to have observed and recall having observed giraffes, that's the thing that needs to be explained. And then I would need to propose an explanation. It'd be weird to just say the thing that needs to be explained, like the observation, no, there's nothing to explain. Like, that'd be a little weird. As long as I conditional on there having been a particular observation, you need to explain it. So if there's any particular data that we need to explain, we need to explain it. And you're not going to get out of that by an appeal to parsimony by just denying the observations. But you could, in fact, deny the observations. You could, in a second order sense. So at conditional on you agreeing, these are the observations, then we can engage in the shared project. So you and I agree, hey, this is the data that needs to be explained. Here's my explanation. What's your explanation? But one thing you could do is say, I don't agree on what the data is. And this is an option available to anti-realists, is to say, I don't agree on the data. And so we'll see what Eric says after this. But you have that, and you could also have, like, there is some data I agree on with realists. So I agree that realists report that it seems to them that realism is true. And so in my view, I would need to explain that. But I don't think that, for instance, it seems that to me or to people in general that realism is true. And so that's not an observation I would agree is true and is therefore in need of explaining. So there may be disputes about what data we have, what the data is that needs to be explained in the first place.
Understand. So what I would say is, I'm not violating any principle of parsimony when I appeal to stance-independent normative truths. What I'm trying to account for is the data as it seems to me. That is the claims that seem true to me.
So the data that seems true to him is that there are stance-independent moral facts. So the explanation for why it seems that there are stance-independent moral facts is that there are stance-independent moral facts. Okay, so that's a explanation for why there might seem to be stance-independent moral facts to Eric, that there are. That's fine. It doesn't seem that way to me. And I think that it only seems that way to some people. And if someone wants to claim that it seems like it's not, look, if it seemed that way to literally everybody on the planet except me, I would be in a pretty tough spot. But if it only tends to seem this way to some analytic philosophers and people that have been influenced by analytic philosophers, what I would need to explain is why it seems that way to them. To give a comparison, some people claim that they have telepathic powers and they could communicate with spiritual beings or something. Now, the explanation, I don't think the best explanation for that observation, because that is true, that people claim to have telepathic powers, is that they actually have telepathy. Psychological explanation for why it might seem to some people like they have telepathy, but they don't actually have telepathy. Now, if it seemed to everybody like they had telepathy, that would be much harder to account for. So there is a question here about who finds realism to be intuitive and to what extent they share the same intuition. So if you look at the Philpapers survey data, you'll find that about a quarter of the respondents favor anti-realism. I don't know if it seems to them that realism is true. Probably for most of them it does. For naturalists, it might seem that realism is true, but they make up about a third, I think. And so what you actually only get, I think it was 26.1% endorse anti-realism, only 26.6% endorse non-naturalist realism, which is comparable. It's not much more than the amount of anti-realists in the data that they gathered. It's not clear to me what the phenomenology is like of the other anti-realists or of naturalists. And it could be that a majority don't construe morality in distinctively non-naturalist realist terms. It may or may not seem that way to them. Even among philosophers, as far as how it seems to non-philosophers, again, we don't have a lot of great data on this. So this is a question where I think there's an open empirical question about what observations we're really working with here. Because if it turns out it's something that's fairly narrow and confined to certain populations, some explanation, some error theory of why those people are mistaken, I think is a lot more defensible than if it were everybody.
Trying to account for all of those, including the claim that you ought to save that kid. You ought to save that kid even if you don't want to. The only way to account for that is to countenance stance-independent normative reasons.
But why is that the only way to account for that? So I think we could account for the claim without appeal to stance-independent reasons. And that would be the sort of parsimony claim, is that all the claims, the feelings people have, the judgments people have, the attitudes people have, including the judgments, attitudes, and feelings, self-reported commitment to realism of realists, all of that could be explained without positing that realism is true. At least that's on my view, on parsimony ground. So, I don't lean too heavily in parsimony, but I do think it's a more parsimonious position, which is that we don't need stance-independent facts to explain our observations and data. And I certainly don't grant that the data includes that there are stance-independent facts, because that's exactly the thing I'm disputing. So I don't know what data Eric thinks could or only be explained or is best explained by positing these facts. I don't know. I wasn't super clear on that.
I'm not violating a principle of parsimony because I didn't multiply entities beyond necessity.
But that's the whole point. We're saying they're not necessary. So imagine someone says, "Yeah, I think you need to posit Thor to explain why lightning happens," and then I say that's not a very parsimonious explanation. Someone could say, "Yeah, but it really super duper seems to be not just that lightning occurs, but it also seems that Thor causes the lightning." And so, if it's not a mistake to say that I'm not violating the principle of parsimony because I'm explaining both the lightning and my feeling that Thor did it. This seems very similar to that. Like just saying, yeah, but one of the other data points you need to explain is why it seems to me like there are these stance-independent moral facts. Yeah, okay. The fact that there are could explain why you think that, but we could also explain that without thinking that there are. And then the question is like, which is the better explanation? So it doesn't seem to me that they're needed, that they're necessary to explain the feeling or the intuition or the judgment or the attitude or the position that realism is true, or that things seem stance independently, right or wrong.
Need them to account for the normative truth, the normative reality that we're trying to understand.
Okay, so we need them to account for the normative reality that we're trying to understand. Why do we need them? Is it because the normative reality involves stance independent truth? Because that, like, is the explanation and the thing to be explained the same thing here? Like, well, because if the claim is something like, let's take that back.
A principle of parsimony because I didn't multiply entities beyond necessity. I need them to account for the normative truth, the normative reality that we're trying to understand.
Why are they needed? So if the normative reality just is a reality characterized by stance-independent normative facts, then of course you need stance-independent normative facts. But then, what is this, the explanans or the explanandum? Like, what is going on here? This isn't not super clear to me. Because if someone is going to say something like this, and I hope Eric's not saying this, hey, one of our data points is like one of our observations is that there are stance-independent moral facts. So the only explanation for that is that there are stance-independent moral facts. That would be true, but then I would just say that that's not one of our observations. If the observation is that it seems that there are stance-independent moral facts to me, then I would say in that case, sure. And one explanation for that could be that there are. Another explanation could be that they're not and that you're mistaken. And there may be a sense in which that's the simpler explanation. It may not be a simpler explanation. It's going to turn on other considerations, like how reliable are your judgments about these sorts of things? Because, like, I look outside, I see a tree out there. I don't think the simpler explanation is that I'm delusional and there's no tree. And it could very well be that if you stand in the same epistemic relation to these stance-independent moral facts in terms of reliability, that you can see or sense or detect the moral facts, and it's just as reliable as your ability to see the trees outside, then yeah, the best explanation would be that there are such facts. But is that in fact the case in this particular case? Like, is it in fact the best explanation? Do you stand in that same epistemic relation? And of course, the anti-realist is going to say, no, you don't. That's the problem. So it could be, Eric is right, that the fact that there are such facts would be the best explanation, but that's going to turn on a bunch of other considerations that aren't being considered here. And so fair enough in this case.
So I think when people appeal to parsimony,
Yeah, so Dr. Hader is saying this. It sounds like he just conflated the explanand with the explanandum. It kind of looks like that, but I don't think that's what's going on here. I think that it's, when you're in a live stream and you're giving these sorts of answers, things don't always come out as super clear as they could be, and I don't think he's actually doing that. I think it might superficially look like that, but I don't think so. Because there's a difference between it seems this way, or the observations are that there's a prima facie case for it seeming to be like, so someone could say something like this. The common sense view is that there are these stance-independent moral facts. It seems that way to me. We have the shared phenomenology where it sure seems this way. The best explanation for it seeming this way is that it is this way. And I think that would be like the best or the simplest or the only good explanation for this is that there are such facts. that's a totally defensible position. I think it's mistaken, but like in abstract, like the structure of that, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. And so, no, I don't think that conflation is really going on. I could say, yeah, conflation, but philosophers are rarely that careless, and Eric is not careless about this sort of thing. So, you know, I'm sure if you go through my live streams, you'll find many cases, one, where I have conflated things, where it doesn't just look like it, I did, and two, where I look like I conflated things, but I just wasn't speaking as precisely as one would if they sat down and wrote things down. So I don't think that's happening here. I don't think there's a big issue with this at all. I just don't agree. So, so in other words, the issue here would be, what is the simplest explanation for some set of observations? The observations might be something like the shared seemings or phenomenology or intuitions or some set of things that would seem to provide some prima facie case for moral realism. And then the best explanation for that would be the moral realism is true. Something like that. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that sort of approach, I think.
They feel pretty good about that because it sounds like something that's coming from the sciences. It sounds like they're very, very serious, and but that's a mistake. They're sort of, first of all, the sciences don't even use it like that. They don't just count up the number of entities in two theories and say, oh, well, this theory has fewer entities, so that one wins. Yeah. No. If one of the theories that countenances fewer things, but it doesn't explain all the things that they were trying to explain, that's not a better theory. Parsimony kicks in only when all things are equal. And so if the error theorist can't...
Yeah, I think maybe you could say it's kind of used as a tiebreaker. So, I don't see a big issue with what he's saying here.
Explain why we have reasons to hold certain beliefs or to, act morally in some ways, then they haven't accounted for all the truths that there are. If all things aren't equal, the realist can account for some things that the error theorist can't. So parsimony doesn't kick in. It kicks in only when all things are equal. Okay, that was a big long way.
And do you think that's the biggest pitfall for like error theorists, is that they are not able to account for, the evidence? At least it seems that we have these reasons, to believe certain things.
Not able to account for the evidence, at least it seems. So I think that's how he interpreted it. I think that's the right interpretation of this, or at least that's a viable interpretation of this. Maybe I shouldn't say it's the right one. Cool.
Something of that sort.
It's part of the problem. I mean, like if they had excellent reasons to not to countenance these sorts of things, that may be one thing. But basically, the kinds of things that they're worried about are these things like, parsimony in some vague sense, like, it commits us to an extra thing.
I don't think Eric is I don't really disagree with him that much here. Like, I do think that parsimony does favor anti-realist accounts, but I don't think it's a simple or easy path to walk. And it could be presented in a crude way. I think it can be motivated by unjustified, not very plausible worries, like I don't want too much metaphysics and stuff like that. Now, I share a lot of those worries, but I don't think that they're like dialectically very forceful. So when realists are like, look, if someone's just going to dismiss these views because they think they're strange, or they don't want metaphysics, or in light of other commitments that they have, those are not necessarily very good reasons. I'm on board with that. There might be some background questions to ask about whether the background views that are motivating these kinds of concerns are themselves better grounded than the alternative. And I think they probably are. And so if I did have to take sides on here, it'd probably be the error theorist side overall. But that wouldn't mean that there wouldn't be caveats, qualifications, or points where I think that the realist critics of the error theorist view aren't on point, where I think, in other words, I think this is a genuine case where realists can land some legitimate dialectical blows against the positions that they're arguing against. That shouldn't be surprising. I'm not an error theorist, so that I think that realists can do some damage to these views shouldn't be surprising at all. There's a reason I don't endorse these views, and this would be at least part of it. I think I'm going to have to wrap it up soon there, though.
As I've just said, like, I'm not, so what? Like, we're trying to account for all the data in the domain. So sometimes we got to do that. Scientists do that all the time too. If there's things about the domain they're trying to understand, they haven't explained it all, they might have to introduce a new entity to try to explain what's going on here. That's all I've done.
And if there's observations that couldn't be readily explained without positing new phenomena, like properties, phenomena, things to explain them, then it makes sense to posit them. I just don't think that there are. Like, I don't think there's any observations like, hey, a bunch of realists claim realism is true, so we need realism to be true to explain why they think that. That's very crude control, but that's basically my thing on it. No, we don't. We could explain it in some other way. Now, the thing is then, okay, well, what's the explanation? And then that becomes a very tough road for me. And I do think if you're going to say, hey, a bunch of very smart, well-informed, thoughtful people that have spent a lot of time thinking about this think this is true, why do you think they're all wrong? And if I just go, I don't know, that's not very satisfactory. So I do think I have my work cut out for me. I have to explain why I think realists are wrong, and that's a tough road. And I make a big point about it not being a common sense view or a view widely shared among non-philosophers, but it's really not that big of a deal. Like if a bunch of scientists think general relativity is true and non-scientists don't think that, am I going to go, well, it's not widely held among non-scientists, so who cares? No. Experts can arrive at conclusions that may not be shared by the general public, and it's totally fine. So then the question would be, what makes them experts? Why should we think they're true? What methods are they using? Are they good methods? So there's a lot of work for me to do here. I do not think that I can just wave a wand of anti-realism and reject realism. I think there's tons of important work to do here. And I think that's a good place to wrap up for now. There's 30 more minutes of the video. I think I just spent almost 2 hours talking about 10 minutes of a video. Actually 10 minutes and what was it? It was like 22 and 29 seconds, something like that. So that's a bit ridiculous, but whatever. Hey, I also feel like a lot of my thoughts, this is a live stream, so a lot of my thoughts are just coming out of my head, and I repeated myself a few times, and I don't feel good about that. Something I got to work on, but I'm going to wrap it up there for today as far as reviewing the video. So some things to say. I am trying to grow this channel, and I do see that it's growing. I want it to grow more. So I'll mention a few of the standard sorts of things that I'll mention at this point. I do have a link in my description to a link tree. I started using a link tree to aggregate all my links so you don't see this giant description. Go check out my link tree. You see lots of stuff there. See a link to my blog. You see a link to my academic website, which I just remade a new academic website. So you can check that out. What else do I have on there? I don't know. I'm going to go look. I already forgot. Where's my link tree? Can't even remember my own dang thing. Too much going on. What do I got on Linktree? In fact, I could even show this. I could share it so you can see what I'm talking about. Maybe that'll encourage people to go check it out. Let's do it. Okay. So let me show you my Linktree. Here it is. You can see it's super cool. I got my logo on there. And so you see it'll link to the YouTube channel. That's very recursive and self-referential. You could follow my YouTube channel to go click this link to click back on my YouTube channel. I'm on TikTok. You could go check that out. So the things I'll say, do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. The more subscribers I get, the more people I reach, the better for me and for you and for everybody. Unless you really hate my content, you're here hate watching, which is fun for me because it gives me people to talk to. I mean, look, I'm not here like doing recipes and showing you how to cook stuff. I'm here to argue with people. So if you disagree with me, awesome. So then I got my TikTok. Go check that out. You can follow me over there. I got my blog. You can check that out. I got my academic site. I got a Discord community. That's a link straight to my community on Discord. You could join there. And I just revamped it and got some cool new features and stuff on there. So you could go join my Discord community. I'm trying to hit 1,000 people that I think you get some perks and benefits of that. And then, yeah, like stuff if you want to like sign up for Patreon and that sort of stuff. I have all those sorts of ways to support the channel. So you can do all that. I don't do these kind of pitches a lot for my channel, but I do appreciate when people like the videos, subscribe to the channel, and all that stuff. And do go check out the channel that was hosting Eric Sampson. I think they did a great job. I very much disagree with some of the things that were said there. And but that's what philosophy is about. It's about disagreements, about discuss. I mean, it's not just about that. There's collaborative philosophy and there's lots of other things. But a big part of philosophy is disagreements. And that's what makes it interesting and fun. And so on the one hand, it would be wonderful and utopian and awesome if all the matters were settled and all the truths were known. On the other hand, we're not there yet. And so for now, we're going to have debates and disagreements. And I think it's great that there's content like this. So if you see me critiquing this content, it's not because I'm like, I hate that someone did this. I think it's awesome that someone's out there disagreeing with me. I think they should agree with me because, overall, what I want to happen is people disagree and then we fight it out and then I win. And then everybody agrees with me. No, but many times I just turn out to be wrong. And then my views on lots of stuff has changed over time. And so this is the process. The process is everybody talking to each other. So I think it's great. So do go subscribe there. If you do leave comments in the channel, do people like. I don't like when people are jerks in YouTube comments. And yeah, so all that stuff. So yeah, I don't even know anything about the channel, but do go check it out. Hopefully there's going to be lots of cool stuff out there. But I got my stuff, so check that out. And yeah, I guess that's all for now. I'll be back. It's only going to be about 2.5 hours. So I got to go get something to eat. So I'm going to be on a debate or discussion later today. I don't think it's like a time debate. I think it's an open discussion. So about metaethics. So it is Metam Monday. We're getting double metaethics today. I don't know what channel that's on. I don't know if I'm going to be streaming it to this channel. I'll ask if I can, but I don't know if they're going to be cool with that. If they are, then you'll see it on this channel in a few hours. If not, I'll post it in the community section once I'm able to do that. Okay. Is that it? I just see one last comment. Well, I'll read that one. David in. There's literally no, quote, realist datum that can't be more parsimoniously explained by a sophisticated model of biological, experiential, and social conditioning. The data rest in speech and intuition. I completely agree with that. I do think we've got the better explanations, but it's still going to take a lot of work to show why we've got the better explanations. I don't think we could just sit on our bums and assume we've got the upper hand here because, you know, we're taking this empirical approach. We could explain it all without positing all the special properties. Maybe we need special properties. When I say maybe, I mean like, look, could be wrong here, but I very much don't think so. Obviously, I wouldn't take the position I do if I thought otherwise. But we'll see. We'll see where the discussions go. Could be 10, 20 years from now, I'm going to be a realist, and this whole channel is going to be the most embarrassing thing I ever did. But who knows? We will see. We will see. Until next time, which is very soon, I will see you all later. And again, I do have another video on consciousness coming out in a few days where I talk to Answers in Atheism. He's been on the channel before. So I will see you all then. Take care, everybody.